Okay, so it is 9 o'clock and therefore we shall start. Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Manx Care held in public. We are not being filmed today, but we are being recorded, and the full recording of the board meeting will be available to the public to listen to. We don't have any apologies.
Aaron will join us. He's not present at the moment.
Okay, running late. Marina, you are very welcome. Thank you for representing the Medical Director's Office.
Thanks.
So I'm going to start the meeting, as no one ever wants to start a meeting, by paying tribute, as best as I am able, to our chairman. Sorry. It is my privilege to pay this tribute to Andrew and to acknowledge that Andrew was indeed the inaugural chair of this organisation, taking forward Sir Jonathan Michael's recommendations from his report, following Tynwald's approval of all of those recommendations, including the fundamental recommendation of establishing Manx Care. Andrew's legacy will be lasting and life-changing for many people on the Isle of Man. Manx Care has already established new ways of working, literally by improving the culture of the workforce, increasing levels of trust, and encouraging staff to work together across the organisation. We have seen great improvements in standards of care and outcomes for patients and service users. Only yesterday, in our private session as a board, we heard from a patient receiving life-saving treatment through a brand new pathway after a heart attack that was not previously available on island. Andrew was a strong leader, a thoughtful and a caring colleague, an insightful and a collegiate chairman, and his knowledge and expertise were invaluable to us as a new organisation. He was warm, he was funny, he was always incredibly well dressed. He was kind and considerate, and we have plans to honour his legacy, which we will announce once we have agreed them with his wife Sarah and his family. On Thursday, myself, Teresa, Katie, and David Ashcroft will be attending his funeral and representing Manx Care and the people of the Isle of Man. Our thoughts and prayers are with Sarah and his family and friends. Manx Care has indeed lost a great friend and a great leader, but he has left us with the most extraordinary, lasting legacy. I now invite you to stand for a minute's silence. Thank you. The declarations of interest is in your board pack. I ask if anybody has any additional declarations that are pertinent to today's business that should be brought to our attention? No? Thank you. We have the minutes of our meeting from last time, which I will take for accuracy in the first instance. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. Elaine, I think everything is picked up in the action log that needs to be.
It is, Chair.
So I think we are able to accept those as an accurate record of our last meeting. So thank you. If we could go to the action log. So workforce planning is on our agenda today. The remediation of the IT estate. That's on our agenda. I don't think that should be recorded as an action for you though, Katie. Should it?
I didn't think so,
No.
but I did pick that up.
So it can come in your meeting update and then we'll decide whose action.
Yes, if there's a further action to put.
Yeah.
So,
To
I think
whom
if I take that action, Chair, I think as the sort of pseudo lead at the moment for that agenda item, I'll keep that.
Okay. Will is joining the meeting at for the staff story just after 10. So he's going to talk to us about the ambulance service. We have a date for the executive risk management workshop, followed by the board session in July, which is what we agreed yesterday. And the social care action plan is included in your report, Teresa. So we will come to that in due time. Does anyone want to notify me of any other business? No?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Elaine, over to you please, if I may, for the board assurance framework deep dive.
So the board assurance framework has been included again for information. But if we may, Chair, will hand over to Oliver for his deep dive into overwhelming demand, which is risk number 2 in the framework.
Thank you.
So I'll take the paper largely as read. I've included a bit more around our management of demand, not just focusing on the non-elective, but also focusing on our management of elective demand. So from an elective point of view, traditionally the health service on the Isle of Man hasn't had any real mechanism to monitor, review and alter levels of planned demand. And that's something that we've been working on since the establishment of Manx Care just over 2 years ago. So it's safe to say that we inherited quite a significant waiting list position, but we've focused on remediating this over the last 2 years. And that can be summarised by the bullet points below, which in summary is the completion of restoration and recovery phase 1 and the ongoing delivery of phase 2, which is focused around orthopaedics, cataracts, surgical specialties, some areas of mental health and some areas of our outpatient waiting list. The validation of all of our outpatient and inpatient waiting lists across all areas. Developing an improved appointments management system, which is ongoing at the moment, not yet implemented, but the idea of that will be seeing a much reduced period between receiving the appointment letter and actually the appointment taking place. And that's a precursor to hopefully implementing an e-referral type system in the future. Other productivity measures such as patient-initiated follow-up. So rather than giving patients a 6-monthly follow-up, we provide the opportunity for patients to seek a follow-up if they need it, but they don't if they don't, which has been in place in the UK for quite some time and has seen the rate of new to follow-up reduce quite considerably. And we're also going to be developing a consultant level activity in monitoring system so that we can be assured that the levels of activity that are contained within each job plan and in each outpatient clinic template are being delivered, and also a drive to increase theatre utilisation above 85%. All of these productivity improvements don't require any investment because we already pay for that capacity, but we expect that that could increase our capacity by around 20%. We're undertaking a comprehensive demand and capacity analysis at the moment across all specialties within Manx Care, which will determine where there are substantive gaps between demand and capacity, and those will be addressed in the Phase 3 Recovery and Restoration submission. In terms of the actual addressing each individual section within the BAF, the first section, COVID-related demand, although we have been following the endemic approach on the island for just over a year, fluctuating levels of COVID-19 in the community do continue to prove a challenge to Manx Care. We're continuing to deliver the COVID vaccination programme, and only yesterday we started the spring booster programme within care homes initially, but then rolling it on within the hub setting to the most vulnerable in society, which matches the JCVI guidelines. We also continue to see fluctuations in staff absence in relation to COVID, and that's something that we monitor on a day-by-day basis and mitigate as necessary by moving staff around, and that's something that the senior clinicians, senior nurses in the hospital, mental health, etc. Do on a day-by-day basis. Number 2, escalation planning. So we've had the OPAL framework in place within the hospital since October 2021, and this provides a framework by which the operational teams manage periods of increased demand or increased operational pressure, so particularly OPAL 3 and OPAL 4. The hospital has been on OPAL 4 on a number of occasions during the winter pressure period. However, in most cases, we've de-escalated that within 24 hours, thanks to a system-wide response across the ambulance service, emergency department, ward-based teams, social work and social care colleagues, both in the independent sector, in residential and home care. Alongside the OPAL system, the ambulance service also operates the REAP system, which is Resource Escalation Action Plan, which also runs on a 1-to-4 system and is reflective of the pressure in the ambulance service. The service transformation of urgent and emergency care, so the Sir Jonathan Michael review indicated a lack of integration, particularly in out-of-hours urgent care, and that became a recommendation of the review. That translated into it becoming a transformation project as part of the Care Pathways piece of work. However, didn't just focus on the out-of-hours period, focused on the 24-hour period, which is completely natural in my view. However, that programme has been on pause for several months to allow transformation resources to be focused elsewhere. However, we have decided to push forward with some of those projects ourselves and submitted separate standalone bids to the Healthcare Transformation Fund, and some of those projects are progressing at the moment, some of which are on hold, just awaiting funding from the Transformation Officers Board. As I mentioned earlier, demand and capacity planning is an essential part of our ability to manage our demand, and something that's never happened before within the organisation, but something that is happening right at this moment. And as I mentioned, where there is demand gaps between the demand and our capacity that can't be bridged through productivity gains, that those requests for substantive funding will be included in the Restoration and Recovery Phase 3 business case, and that's going to apply across the whole organisation. And then finally, winter planning. We're just out of the formal winter pressures period, which finished on the 31st of March. And the weather miraculously changed on that date. So, like the UK, we have experienced our most pressure winter period in our history. But, you know, we have had the first time that the Isle of Man Health Service has had a winter plan this year, which has contained a number of schemes which has helped to alleviate the impact of winter. Which has included various different things, such as increasing the level of staffing within the hospital primarily, and also the development of a really comprehensive winter communications showing, indicating to patients where urgent care can be sought across the whole system. We have decided within this year's financial allocations that there will be a small allocation dedicated to winter planning, so that we can stand up some additional capacity during the winter period, and we're intending to start the winter planning process in June of next year, this year, sorry, June 2023, in preparation for the commencement of the nominal winter period, which is on the 1st of November. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Any questions or comments? Katie.
Thank you. So I think this is a really good example of where a risk framework is being used as an operational tool, as opposed to it sitting in splendid isolation on the shelf. I think this is a working document. It's being used to govern, it's being used to plan, it's being used to do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is mitigate risk. So this is a really thoughtful paper, Oliver, so thank you. I think this is a really good way of demonstrating how we get under the body of every risk that we have, and I think this is a really good example, so thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa? Yeah, just a couple of questions and a comment, if that's okay, Oliver. So I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I would agree with Katie. We are starting to sort of see this come together as a complete framework. One of the things you talked about was the productivity improvement, and that will become increasingly important for us to demonstrate how we measure that productivity improvement we're able to see, so where we can do more for the same level of resourcing. How confident are you we've got the mechanisms to capture that productivity improvement and be able to sort of report it through the subcommittees and up to the board?
Well, despite our kind of perennial lack of data as an organisation, those productivity measures have been recorded, at least, if not used, for many years. So things like new to follow-up ratio, so the number of follow-up appointments that come from an initial new appointment, that is something that is recorded as a matter of course. DNA rate, so we lose probably around 5% of our capacity more than the UK through DNA. So on average, the UK DNA rate is between 3 and 5%. Here is between 8 and 10%. And that links to what I mentioned earlier around the appointment system. We send out appointments several months in advance, if not, you know, a number of months in advance, which, you know, I myself have fallen foul of that, of missing an appointment because it was sent to me 6 months in advance and I forgot about it. And if it happens to me as the exec of the organisation, I imagine that it happens quite a bit. So that is an area of productivity that we really want to focus on. The IPR shows that an increase in theatre utilisation this month, which is great and is testament to the work that our theatre team are doing around staffing and recovering their staffing position, as well as working alongside Synaptic, but there's still quite a way to go to achieve full theatre utilisation, which, you know, ideally would be between 85 and 90%, because theatres are our most expensive resource in terms of so I'm confident that we've got the data available to report on it. It's just having that piece of work that surrounds all those different elements that is in progress.
I think it's just really important that we quantify it measurably in terms of productivity gain and try and put a financial value to that productivity gain. My other sort of comment is that I think the next stage of evolving this piece of work is to wrap the harm review process around each one of these. So understanding how we assess harm when we are in each of these high level of demand and escalations. And I think that is the next stage. And finally, being able to assess the level of demand in primary care feels really, really important. And if we could sort of describe primary care demand in sort of either Opal terms or something comparable, I think that would enable us to have that sort of full system overview.
Thank you. Yes.
I think it's also important for us to look forwards to. So most of our efficiency metrics and our KPIs relate to our current performance, but I think we all know and recognise that coming down the road at us is ever increasing demand. And I think if you link it to some of the risks that sit in the financial sustainability piece, if funding doesn't keep up with that expected demand, then that problem is only going to get worse. And runs the risk of cancelling out the efficiency and productivity gains that we make through the work that Oliver's described. So I think we just also need to make sure we keep looking forward at what's coming at us, that tidal wave, in terms of that ageing population.
Yeah, thank you.
So just on Teresa's last point, so the PCN has, in the last month, had talks with a CCG in England who has experience of doing a sort of Opal-alike system within primary care. And so once we have our new operations manager on stream, we're going to look to progress that. And hopefully we'll be able to weave up that our Opal, GP Opal framework into the wider Manx care framework.
So any help you need on that, just let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's me. Yep. Thank you.
Nope, I'm afraid not.
Oh, sorry.
Easy target.
For the person sat next to you, it's more difficult. Thank you very much for the paper. Really helpful. Was really interested in the winter planning, and really good that we've had that for the first year. And I just wondered, not for this meeting, but I just wondered, given it was the first time we'd done winter planning in this way, what the learning was and how it might be different next year. And also, I guess we're in a slightly different situation to some other trusts in England, in as much as their funding for winter planning often isn't agreed or put in place until winter's almost over. So we've got some advantages there, which I guess is good. But it was really just really to welcome that and to look at the learning from that first winter planning.
Yeah, so the winter planning period finished, as I said, on the 31st of March. So we'll be kind of doing an evaluation against all those schemes that were funded to see whether they are worth doing again next year in the plan or not. It's safe to say that some of the schemes that were included in the winter plan were kind of either early implementations or interim implementations of some of the recommendations that are contained within the urgent and emergency care transformation. So if we do start to get some traction on that in year, that will certainly help our demand over the winter period.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks, Sarah. Oliver, I'd just like to just get your thoughts around this DNA, this do not attend figure. It seems inordinately high, and whereas I could expect that folk would be naturally nervous, perhaps after COVID, of attending hospital or attending appointments, are we taking advantage of all the various mediums of communication that we can take advantage of? And could you talk us around the work? So, for example, you know, older people might not want to get emails. They might want to get a phone call or a letter, a traditional letter. Or some people might be happy with texts. Some people might be happy with reminders. And, you know, are we satisfied that we're taking advantage of all the technology that's available to us? And are we joining things up where people maybe have multiple appointments? I mean, how ridiculous would it be if you needed to attend for one appointment one day and another appointment the next day? You know, are we actually joining the dots up in that regard?
We're a bit limited with our patient administration system in that it doesn't allow us to select a kind of preferred means of communication. We are a bit stuck with letters, which is a limitation of the system. And one of the things that we're looking to implement is a thing called partial booking. So rather than getting a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Wood, your appointment is on such and such a date at this time," it is, "Dear Mr. Wood, we have received your referral for orthopaedics. Please ring us to arrange an appointment." So there is more of an engagement in that. It's something that the UK implemented back in 2004 as a precursor to the Choose and Book, which became the e-referral system. So we're kind of going a bit, we are going back quite a number of years in terms of NHS kind of history, but it's something that as a precursor to ideally an e-referral system, that the single care record, if that is achieved, will deliver, because that will mean that will involve a single system that is integrated across primary and secondary care. But in the meantime, whilst we've still got the various different systems working in parallel across various different elements of our healthcare system, so EMIS, Medway, Rio, for example, the partial booking system is what we think is a good halfway house whilst we let the digital transformation programs happen.
May I come back, Sarah? Yes, so we're playing catch-up effectively. We're playing catch-up, and that's difficult. So does that sit within Manx Care, or does that sit within transformation? Because I'm quite keen that we adopt going forward. If the UK did it in 2004 and we're now in 2023, we're paying a lot of catch-up, and we're 85,000 people, we're a village, so we should be able to get this right. And I know from being in the community, it is a source of frustration when things are cancelled and people turn up for appointments and maybe they've been changed because the letter's just not caught up with them. So, I would be encouraging us to look at a digital solution rather than the computerization of a manual process, because we can then leapfrog to a state-of-the-art system where people can receive communications as they want. And I was just looking for some assurance that we're thinking about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's our aspiration is that as it happens in the UK, the GP uses the e-referral system to refer a patient, and then the appointment is made, and that's the system that we want to use going forward. I think, as I say, the technology isn't quite there, but we think that the partial booking system will be a good halfway house, but also only opening up appointments that are 6 weeks in advance. One of the issues that we have is that because we open up appointments 12 months in advance, there's consultant leave that has to go into there, so patients get cancelled and then rebooked, which the NHS has never done, and has been a source of frustration for me ever since I've worked for the health service over here. But that's something that we are working on at the moment. So we're going to trial the partial booking system within orthopaedics, I think in May and June, but with a view to opening that up quite, to all other specialties.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. I think, what this demonstrates is that when we have the data and we have the systems working together, we can absolutely use the BAF to provide real assurance to the board, but we obviously in some areas aren't quite there yet. And I think that work of transformation, as Nigel outlined, that those figures are quite stark in terms of our did not attend rates and those in the United Kingdom. So I think anything that we can do to save money in all of those wasted appointments by investing in the transformation piece, I think would be well received by this board. So,
And the public.
and more importantly, by the public. I think anybody receiving an appointment 6 months in advance or a year in advance is going to be challenged to remember that. So thank you very much. My report is in the board pack. I don't have anything to add to it. apart from to record at this meeting my thanks to all of the teamwork that went into our inaugural staff awards in February, and to all of those organisations across the Isle of Man who helped fund it, so we were able to deliver that for our staff at no cost to Manx Care or indeed the public purse, and we are already looking forward to the awards in 2024. So thank you to everybody who was involved in that, and it really was a wonderful opportunity to pay tribute to the hard work of our staff right across the whole of the organisation, and to draw attention perhaps to some of those areas where they're often overlooked. So thinking particularly of laundry and catering, who, you know, really without them we couldn't function, and it was lovely to be able to pay tribute to them. If anyone's got any questions on my report, I'm very happy to answer any. Teresa.
Thank you. So I will assume you've read the report and take most of it as read, just to highlight a few items. So just to confirm that the Spring Booster programme started yesterday, and preparations for the TT have commenced, led by the Director of Operations. With regards to information governance, we submitted our March submission to the Information Commissioner last week, and we have a meeting with him next week to assess the March sort of compliance deadlines. I think we have made sufficient progress in that space, and we are hoping to receive positive feedback on our progress from the ICO, particularly in relation to the deferral of the penalty notice. There has been an awful lot of recruitment into the IG team, and by the beginning of April, the team, which had been at 50% capacity, will be up to full capacity. That is against a backdrop of increasing high demand into the service, both in terms of subject access requests, but also we have strengthened our arrangements for investigating data breaches. So whilst we've put a lot of the policy arrangements in place and tightened up our investigation processes, some of the fundamental issues and that open reporting culture which we have fostered within information governance does mean that we are seeing no less breaches as an organisation. But what I am assured on is that all breaches are being reported to the ICO in line with his requirements, and are being investigated. So we are getting the learning from that, and we are reporting that through the Digital and Information Committee. I will come to and allow the Interim Executive Director of Social Care to update on our preparations for Ofsted, because we have now received the date for that inspection, and it is the end of April. I just wanted to provide an update on Ballasalla medical practice. So, as the board will be aware, the contract for Ballasalla Medical Centre has been sort of handed back, and in line with the Attorney General's advice, that contract will cease at the end of April, not at the end of July as was initially anticipated. We did put out a prior information notice and received a couple of expressions of interest, but the executive team have considered all possible options which have been presented to the board previously, and in private board yesterday we did take the decision that Manx Care would take over the running of Ballasalla practice from the 1st of May, and we'll go through a period of sort of due diligence and preparation throughout April. We don't intend to run that practice for a long period of time, but we do intend to run it for a few months to allow that position to be stabilised, to assess the wider piece, to allow some of the work the board had agreed around primary care at scale to move forward, and then reassess its situation. So based on the board's decision yesterday, we will start that work immediately with a view that Manx Care will run Ballasalla medical practice from the 1st of May. I think it's important to say that all of the staff roles within the practice will be maintained, and there will be no anticipated change for patients. That's what we're trying to protect and stabilise, working with the practice closely to ensure service continuity. It does give us the opportunity to look at how we can bring some of secondary care out into primary care, look at how some of the aspects of primary care at scale can be used to assist the practice in the short term. There is an update on primary care at scale. You will recall the board did not approve the full business case for all of the primary care at scale, but absolutely signed up to the vision of primary care at scale, but wanted to take a more stabilising approach for the next 6 months. We've been meeting weekly with the primary care network to agree what those what we've described as 7 programmes of work, which will ultimately aim to put some additional capacity into the system and take forward some of the real imperatives over the next 6 months. So we are looking at an opportunity to bring virtual GP appointments in as additional capacity across the system. We absolutely do need to stabilise community pharmacy, which is an absolute pillar of primary care at scale. We want to make sure that the CQC actions identified for primary care are delivered as quickly as possible. We do want the locality hubs working slightly differently and want to build on some of the work that has been done in the north of the island, with the GP having really strong input into the primary care hubs. So we want the hubs to work slightly differently, with more cohesion and connectivity with primary care. We want to redefine frailty and what frailty services look like in the out-of-hospital space. I think we've got a clear frailty offer for the hospital-based services, but we very much need to describe what frailty looks like across the community. So, and what we want to be able to do is look at the right services to shift from secondary care to primary care in a very controlled way, in a very considered way. So we absolutely understand the types of services which we do want to transfer into primary care and how those are transferred with the right level of resourcing to be able to make those successful and those transfers clear and cohesive. I have updated on the Risk Management Committee. Again, this is one area linking back to the board assurance framework that we have paid particular attention to. We inherited a number of risks which had been sat on the risk register a long time, hadn't really been reviewed, re-evaluated, reassessed, and there's been a lot of work done in the risk management space. And as I say, we have workshops with the members of the executive management team scheduled in May, which Paul will be leading, along with a board development session on risk appetite later on in the summer. The paper describes sort of the progress around those housekeeping of risks, and the Risk Management Committee has been undertaking deep dives with the care groups to really challenge, support, understand their risk profiles, and ultimately support us to mitigate some of those extreme risks for the organisation, which are outlined on page 7 of my report. Just with regards to the executive team, I'm very grateful to Dr Hudson for stepping in and covering Dr Andol through April. We will be interviewing for the interim executive medical director in the next couple of weeks, with final interviews taking place on the 21st of April. The Executive Director of Social Care will be going out to advert in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But I'm very grateful for David Hamilton for coming back to join us and stepping into that role. And the Executive Director of Finance, Performance and Delivery closed yesterday, and those interviews are scheduled for the end of next week. Can I just invite David to just give an update on social care, and particularly around the preparations for Ofsted, because we were meeting with them yesterday.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, good morning, everybody. Yeah, we did meet with Ofsted yesterday, and this is very similar to obviously the CQC inspections that have happened recently. So we've commissioned Ofsted to join us on the island to undertake a piece of work, which we think is a unique opportunity to really learn and continue to develop our progress and our journey through children and family services. So they will be on island from the 24th to the 28th of April, doing the first part of their inspection, which will be around residential care services for children. Then we'll have a 2-week break, and then they'll be coming back for a further 10 to 12 days to look at the rest of kind of children's services generally. So preparations are well underway, as you would expect, even though the dates were brought forward. Initially, it was supposed to be post-TT when they were coming, but just recently announced that they were going to come to us sooner. Lots of preparations with our staff, as you'd expect, many of whom, in fact, the majority of whom haven't experienced an inspection before. So we are trying to make sure that they understand the positivity around this, and that we do hope that they have a kind of positive experience through that journey as well. The inspectors yesterday were very supportive. They understand some of the context now, which is important for them. They're very sensitive to the journey that we've been on the island, particularly over the last 2 years. So we hope that they're being briefed well enough to understand the cultural issues, the context within which we're working, and the legislation in particular, and the difference between the UK and the Isle of Man. So hopefully they're briefed enough to understand those differences, and we'll take that into account when they're doing their inspections. There won't be a judgment, so they will not do a judgment at the end of this, but what we do hope, and what they expect to give us, is a comprehensive report which will help us move forward, identifying both positives, and we know there are lots of positives happening across the island at the moment, and equally areas that we need to develop. So the intention with the team, and we've had quite a few conversations, again, as you'd expect around this, is we need to hopefully have no surprises. So we are self-aware, we hope, around this, time will tell, and that we are honest and transparent in terms of where we are. And we know there are gaps already in our services, particularly in the strategy, policy, procedure arena. Equally, in practice, in some areas, we know there are areas of improvement that we need to work on following audits that we've done internally. So preparations are going well. The self-assessment isn't quite complete, but it isn't due until 2-3 weeks' time. When they do come, we will obviously host them as best we can around all of this and make sure that they get to see everything that they need to. It is quite flexible in terms of what they're looking at, and they will, as they normally do inspections, they will veer off in particular directions if they find something that's particularly good or particularly worrying for them as well. So we are absolutely looking forward to that. It is a massive opportunity, but there's a bit of trepidation in some areas, as well as some excitement as well. And clearly we'll keep reporting back to board and colleagues as we move on.
Thank you, David. Do we know when we can expect the report or a draft report?
Not yet. They will give us verbal feedback straight afterwards, but then after that, I haven't got a timescale yet for them.
Well, thank you for the preparation that's going into it, and you know, I think it is an opportunity, but as we know with the CQC inspection, there is, of course, when people come to inspect services, there's a level of anxiety amongst staff, which we do understand. So we'll be thinking of social care colleagues as they prepare for that. So thank you. Thank you. Any questions for Teresa? Katie put her hand up. Sorry, Katie and then Nigel.
Well, I've got one for David and one for Teresa. So David, everything that you said resonated really well with me. I just want to draw out one thing, and that is around the value system. Teresa has been really good since she came to the post of creating a no-blame culture within Manx Care and trying to really change that value system so that people don't feel that if something's gone wrong, they will be blamed. You didn't say those words. It was inherent in what you said, but I want to draw that out. Have you had the conversation with the staff? Do they understand that they can be open. It's not about blame. It's about, as you say, learning, hopefully finding what we already know, but, you know, just getting some validation around what we already know. It's about making sure people are supported.
Absolutely, Katie. Yes. And Julie Gibney and the team have talked directly with staff around this. And in fact, one member of staff said, I would like to opt out if I can, because she was quite worried about it, hadn't been through it. So they spent some time with her and the rest of the teams, just talking through, again, the positivity around this. And it isn't about blaming them if things go wrong, and trying to encourage people to be as honest as they want to be in those kind of conversations, because it's in all of our interest to get that right. So hopefully that support is there. And you're right, the culture has been that in the past, and then there's still elements of that around that I see, but it is moving in the right direction.
Brilliant, thank you. And then, Teresa, just on Ballasalla, and again, I just want to draw something out. On day one, will patients see any change, is my question about Ballasalla.
No, they shouldn't.
That's okay.
You know, there will be changes in the background, and I think we've got to be respectful for the GPs who have agreed to help us in the short term, but actually they have handed back their contract for a reason. But from a patient perspective, absolutely no change. That's what we're aiming to achieve through the transition work we're doing during April.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So, David, my daughter-in-law is a clinical psychologist, and she often tells me when I'm facing challenges in business to turn apprehension into excitement. Apparently, it creates the same reaction in the body. So when people are apprehensive about inspections, turn it into excitement about the future. Just a thought there.
We'll do our best, Nigel.
So my sort of question really is for Teresa, Sarah, and it's around Ballasalla. Usual caveats in that I'm a patient of Ballasalla, and I've disclosed this before, but it's important you know that. And two of the GPs that work in Ballasalla I know, and one is a good personal friend, although we've not discussed this in detail. I'm sure we will at some point. My question is really to draw out this vision of primary care a little more, because, you know, at one of the board meetings, I had some questions about the primary care at scale project, in that we are talking about spending a lot of money on it. And, you know, the thought that I had was, can we afford to spend it? Can we afford not to spend it? And there was tension there. So I'm really interested in seeking to draw out, Teresa, not the details of the Ballasalla resignation, but the principle that will enable us to trailblaze a new, more flexible model within Manx care and within primary care at scale, so that we can perhaps look forward to attracting more GPs to the island, because we can offer more flexibility, more options for employment, perhaps even better pay, so that, you know, and I've banged on about this before, so that we have people fighting to get into this beautiful island rather than us having to drag them over here. And I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit, please.
Okay, and it might be that Oliver and I do a bit of a double act, because I guess I've got a very clear vision of what I would like to achieve, and it is one of the 7 pillars. So my sort of vision for primary care and primary care at scale is that we have agility and flexibility in that model. So if a practice wants to hold the contract and have partners in the traditional way, then that's absolutely fine. What we would want to do is offer support via a menu of back office functions or tailored responses, which means we are responsive to some of the challenges, helping where we can, and ultimately taking the pressure off and working with those practices. There is also the other aspect of that salaried option, whereby, you know, we're very happy to employ GPs on a salary basis. We want to offer the most attractive proposal and flexibility, and sometimes that it does involve sort of portfolio careers. GPs who want to come to the island don't necessarily want to be a practice partner but want to have a range of portfolio elements to their job plan, for want of a better word. And I want us to be able to achieve that. So that is the vision. I think we've got to continue to work hard to build trust with practices and do that through the network. We want to be able to respond quite responsively and quickly and promptly to issues and not be on the back foot. So almost that horizon scanning and heads up and trust to know when things are a little bit difficult. What I've learned from Balasala, rightly or wrongly, is that there wasn't necessarily a level of trust in Manx care, which meant we were the first to know these things. And I think we've got to continue working hard with GPs and have that really open, transparent dialogue with them, which means they do trust us, they will share when things aren't going particularly well, and we are sufficiently interested and responsive in order to help them with whatever the solutions look like. That's my vision of how we will deliver a better system for the island. And I think and that's why things like the Opal framework for primary care is really, really important, because, you know, they're under no less pressure. It's just we describe it in a hospital way, in a really clear, cohesive way, but actually social care, primary care, community services are under no less pressure. It's just slightly difficult to describe. So,
Yes, please, Oliver.
No, I think we've made great strides working at the primary care network with Manx Care, and it's been great having Teresa coming every week to our primary care at scale meeting, because it really feels like, you know, we've got a forum to advance things and to have those discussions at a level, you know, with key decision makers in the room. I think the trust is building. I think we've got way to go, absolutely, but I think the foundations are really there. So primary care network and members are keen on many of the pillars. Some of the things I think we still need to work the details out of, but the positive is we've got a forum in which to do that. And really, as has been alluded to, we do need to stabilise general practice. We need to ensure that, because these practices are into businesses, what businesses need is stability, they need predictability, they need resourcing to deliver what they're being asked to deliver. And I think the primary care at scale, if we get it right, will deliver this, will help with this, and also deliver the benefits to the broader Manx care, which is about moving things out of secondary care into primary care. And it's really important that we do that in a way while acknowledging that all areas are, especially general practice, is very much is at risk, and is very full at capacity. So we need to make sure that these projects are done in a careful, considered way that is agreed. And we also need to make sure that we've got our finance colleagues on side, because we need to make sure that the plans that we have are put in a way that can go through business case review and can be resourced. But I think we've acknowledged the challenges that we've got. We know what the challenges are, and I think we're on a road to meeting them.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Teresa, for your report. So I'm delighted that we've been joined by Will. Will, I'm sorry it's so formal, but we are very friendly. So why don't you come to the front row? Or
Go sit in the hot seat.
exactly. We'll just get the spotlight.
Put it in the middle, please. So
It's like mastermind on steroids.
So as a board, we're always keen to hear from staff and from patients, and we had, so no pressure, but we had a very powerful story yesterday from a patient in our private board session, and you're very welcome here this morning to talk to us about the time you've been heading up the ambulance service and your reflections on that and your vision for its future. So please.
Thank you, Sarah. Very good morning, all. So for those who I haven't had the pleasure to meet, I'm Will Bellamy. I'm the head of the ambulance service here on the Isle of Man. And so I thought I'd break it down, as you've introduced, into 3 key areas. So my thoughts on my first year from service, Manx care, and actually being a here to the Isle of Man. Key highlights, and then what's made me proud, and then my vision for the future. So I think if I start with the service, I think they've had a real turbulent few years prior to and many years prior to me starting in post, and they started to turn a corner in the latter stages of DHSC under Oliver's leadership, and then moved into Manx care. However, they've always had a challenge of this unprecedented rise and growth in activity that, they were an organisation that was based on a staffing level and equipment level of circa 5,000 to 8,000 calls, and we closed last year on just shy of 15,000 with the same amount of workforce and team members. And I think what that gave a very troubled culture when I started, all focused on operational delivery, nothing around the periphery, which really challenged culture, behaviours, and drove some really challenging behaviours from peers, because the stress, we were trying to respond to that monumental growth without a plan. However, the staff are enthusiastic, they're open to challenge and debate, and problem solving, and I've introduced them to the wider arena of some of the National Ambulance Resilience Units, networks, frameworks that are common across within the NHS, which they don't need to solve it here on Ireland. They don't need to just try and look at it from an Ireland perspective, in that if it's not on Ireland, we can't do it. Can we look at what there's across? Is there benchmarking, or has someone done it before, and can we just steal shamelessly the ideas and implement it here on the island, given our context? However, we do have amazing kit and equipment. It's probably very jealous of our NHS colleagues. I know our vehicles are older than 7 years, the latest equipment, and has always been put in, and and the staff are really grateful. And I think also Manx Care, I know, is still very junior in its length of service, but it's a great organisation to work with, really friendly. I appreciate it's on a journey from its days within the DHSC ran, but I think coming from a long and established career in the NHS, it's palpable how you can make change from grassroots up to talking to the board, and also, no suggestions are wrong, or, people are open to them. And I think that leads me into what makes me feel really proud. And I think I've been really proud to see how the team, and I say wider team of all 50 of us, have responded to the challenges, the polite challenges that I've made, the coaching and how to deliver things that they can work on. I'm no longer being told, if you don't like it, there's a boat in the morning, which I take as a fond. But I'm also really proud of how they took on board the challenge and nervousness of a CQC inspection. They opened their arms to the CQC, they were open to their challenges, and I was nervous because I was asking questions, and and I was worried that inspectors wouldn't get the island context, but they were very receptive to the island, receptive to our challenges, but also the staff really showed the organisation in a very good light, but also identified where we need to improve on. And I was really proud of that. I'm also proud that we had the opportunity to showcase the island via our TT with our mutual aid colleagues of sort of 8-week notice. Working with colleagues in Wales, we had 6 members of staff, and we're about to do that again. And what I was really proud of is the feedback that the guys from Wales gave back to their trust. Wales had over 100 applications for people to come on a 3 weeks secondment here onto the Isle of Man, and I thought that was, Wales has done a shortlisting and interview to come and showcase Wales on the island. And I was really proud that our team's ability to showcase the island really worked really well, and it's a great place to come and work and live. I think there are some, I'm really proud of the way that we're doing new clinical pathways. We're thinking things different. You know, if someone says no to me, I always look at it like a challenge. And I take the island's context that we're in, you know, we are an island. So some of our services that are gold standard might not be able to be access 24/7. So the story around, you know, PPCI, so patients that are suffering from a heart attack, we will give them medication to dissolve that clot. But gold standard of care is an intervention via a cardiac cath lab where we suck the clot out, and, you know, and patients are discharged relatively quickly and well. And working with our colleagues in the fixed wing air ambulance, our partnership with Great North, we managed to work with, and cardiologists based here on the island, we've managed to link together a pathway to make sure that we could, if possible, and I appreciate island context, whether that we would get patients over for gold standard of care whilst if they were having that medical problem. I think if I move then into my vision for the future, you know, is just to, first of all, just ensure sustainability and stability for the service, ensuring that we're able to produce a business case, that we ensure that we're right-sized, not in just forms of workforce, but budget, so that we're enabled to be responsive to the 909 calls, change our clinical model to treat patients with the right care in the right place at the right time, but also be responsive in our operational model, that actually we don't continue to send 2 people in a big yellow ambulance, that where we could deal with patients, maybe signpost them on the phone, or where we can treat them at home, and working with partners, because we have an eye-watering 85% conveyance rate to Noble's ED, and, you know, it's around the challenges around the sustaining that. But also on the flip side, around infrastructure and support, you know, working with our blue light partners, the blue light strategy, we need to support that we're responsive and ready to respond to incidents around major incidents or critical incidents where we have a gap in our assurance around that. Over many years, it's been merged together, things sit differently, so all the major incident equipment sits with the fire service. But if something would happen, we've not necessarily got any of our own resources. And we need to put that right. I think we need to be bold and brave in our pursuit of clinical and quality and excellence, and the ambulance service has been solely focused on operational delivery, and I'm trying to make sure that we also look about, you know, I ask the question regularly, well, how good are we? And we're restricted that we're 100% paper generating organisation from clinical records. We're moving into the digital. We went live yesterday on a health roster, so we've now got a full digital rostering system which will help with the finances, and also the awareness of situational awareness around operational cover, but also moving into electronic clinical records, Manx care records, because that will help empower clinicians to make right decisions for patients. I think also we need to be seen as an enabler for Manx Care to support its delivery, and also work with partners, because we have a paramedic workforce, a profession that's growing in professionalism, accreditation and ability, clinical ability. And I've got the workforce wish to work in other arenas, but I want my nervousness around that, but also, you know, the opportunities as a senior paramedic here on the island is having a strong foundation of clinical governance and education that will enable, you know, the paramedics and the profession to really be a cornerstone of support working in, if they wish to, primary care, secondary care, in advanced care, and how do we make that happen? And we're having some discussions with primary care around that. And I think there's also opportunities around efficiencies, effectiveness. I challenge why have we always done it that way? Why do we carry so much different pieces of equipment? Is it the best piece of equipment? And then working in my vision is just making sure we comply with Manx Care, with working with the Blue Light strategy, the digital strategy, and also what we're looking forward to around Big Green and the green agenda for the island. I think we've got a real bold and brave future. We've got a great outlook, and actually, you know, with colleagues sat around this table and also with the team, we can do something really special here on the Isle of Man that actually will deliver the Manx Care vision of being a world-leading small island healthcare provider. I'll pause there and really invite any questions.
Thanks, Will. Thanks ever so much. Do colleagues have any questions or comments for Will? Katie.
I'm addressing obviously the award-winning well-made. So I'm humbled that you're here. Firstly, the patient story that we heard yesterday was the story around the heart pathway that you mentioned, and you were name-checked in that. So I would like to say that your compassion is recognised widely. So I'd like to thank you for that. My question around, and I love your phrase, polite challenge.
Yeah.
How do you feel that the culture within the service is changing, within your service is changing? Do you see, you talked about your journey, you've talked about your vision. Can you see a difference between when you joined and where we are now with your staff?
Yeah, so we're making incremental steps, and one of the things that I base it on is people making themselves vulnerable. And we've had a difficult history around some of our concerns around how we've managed clinical concerns and complaints. And actually, one of the things that we've really introduced is looking actually that you know, as someone alluded to earlier, just no blame culture, just culture. And what I benchmark that on is seeing that we have an upward trajectory in reporting of incidents via the DATEC systems, or people coming going, I'm not sure what I've done is the best thing, i.e. could I have done it differently, and having really open clinical debate. And that wasn't there 18 months ago, and it was just head down, get through it. And that's what I really take as just really green shoots of, you know, it's not a bad thing, a high level of reporting of incidents, that's a good thing, but also people going, actually coming up, you're knocking on the door of the office and going, I don't have login to the clinical pathways, the digital, the clinical strategies. Can you just find out what my password or get it reset for me? And I think that wouldn't have happened. They would have just gone under the radar, and then something would have happened. So I think that's why probably my example is one of the small benchmarks around green shoots of the change of the culture, and also people wanting to talk.
Thank you, Katie. Teresa.
Yeah, no, I just want to again express my thanks to Will for how he's taken the service forward. And I think there is a theme, and I would like to think this is replicated throughout Manx Care, that commitment to driving up quality standards whilst also investing in training and education and development, which means we have the highest quality of provision for our patients and service users, but also we have that commitment to our staff around their ongoing education and development. And I see what you have done in the ambulance service. I see what Paul has done around the nursing piece, and particularly making the decisions to invest in a director of education at Kildare, really raising the profile of education. I see what we're doing in the medical space with some of the associate medical directors with a real focus. I see what we're doing in social care around celebrating professional standards, recognising professional contributions, investing in people's training and development, in the safeguarding space, skilling our staff up. And I do think we should capture that, because I do think it's a really important part of setting ourselves apart in terms of the standards we're driving for. We know what good looks like and we're aiming for it. And we are recognising the investment needed in our staff to give them the skills and capability to do their jobs at the highest standards, this working at the top of their licences, giving them the career paths. I've seen how that has also impacted, and Oliver and I have discussed this several times, how that feels in therapy services who felt quite forgotten and didn't quite understand their role in the organisation, where they fit, how they developed professionally. And I probably just want to thank all of the board members and Will for sort of advocating that, championing it across the organisation, because I do think that will ultimately help our recruitment and retention of staff, and allow us to achieve excellence in clinical care and delivery.
Thank you, Teresa. Tim.
Thank you. I just firstly want to acknowledge your clear passion, but also your expertise in this, and thank you clearly need both in terms of people being passionate about the service, but also having the expertise, which you clearly do, which is great to hear your work and what you're achieving. You talked about the number of calls and the increase in calls, and you talked about the percentage of the conveyance at 80%, and I'm assuming elsewhere it's I think in England it looks like it's
50%.
50%. And I was just wanting to ask about whether you're getting the support from other areas of the organisation to look at that, to understand that, and to think about where people could be offered a different form of support, whether that's social care or community support, and whether you and your team are getting the support to look at that and to work that through.
On the whole, I would say yes. We've done some deep dive activity to have a look what's driving our activity. Appreciate here on the island, in the island context, when you compare across the NHS, there isn't the vast array of community services here to hand patients off or keep people at home. Yesterday I was on an NHS shift working on an NHS ambulance and managed, very seamlessly transferred a patient into intermediate care who continues to do the next line and working with the GP, IV antibiotics. Those services don't necessarily are here at the moment, or what that looks like. So the context is different. Where we are working through with pathways, i.e. we're working with Mark Young, our frailty ACP, the wellbeing teams, around to actually say, what can we do differently. We've also just set up working with the geriatricians, our frequent service users, so patients that have called more than 4 times in a month, and having a look at what's the unmet care need and trying to understand that. And is it care, is it wellbeing needs, is it isolation, or is there just something that they're regularly calling us for to then try and put a plan in place? And we're doing that not only just frailty, but also working with our mental health and drugs and alcohol team, and trying to get care plans and get better at care planning. I know it's very standard in other areas, but it's new to the ambulance service here. So we've just worked through the governance of keeping care records for our staff to access them. And obviously that will be addressed under the wider digital strategy in the Manx care record, but we're having to do that, but not on our own. We're working with partners. So we are, yes, Tim, thank you for your question.
Any other questions or comments? Will, if I may, thank you for what you've done and for coming and bringing your very high levels of experience and professionalism to the service, and I think we are starting to see that, and I think Teresa put that brilliantly. I think for the board, it's to acknowledge that you've moved the culture forward. And then I think the next piece is how do we, and I've had the privilege of spending some time with your team, and how do we unlock some of those ideas that they've got about, actually, if you call an ambulance, success is not coming to hospital. Success might be being treated at home and being able to stay at home. Yeah. And I think some of those innovations around education of people on the Isle of Man, of upskilling your team so that they are able to treat people, moving away from this idea that getting in the ambulance is the right thing to do, and actually, being treated at home or in a different community setting might be the appropriate thing to do. And I think as an integrated health and social care system, hopefully unlocking some of those pathways will be easier for us than it is across. I too, Tim, was very struck by those statistics, and we have to be able to change those. So I think you have the board's support to carry on doing what you're doing, please, but also to kind of move to that next stage of, okay, how do we unlock some of these? One of your team described it to me as expectation. Yeah. There is an expectation that I ring 999, that an ambulance comes quickly, and I'm going to end up at Nobles. Yeah. And how do we reframe that to say, actually, the best thing for you might be completely the opposite? Yeah. Clearly, if you're in a life-threatening situation, you must always expect the ambulance. But I think particularly as you've identified those people who ring regularly, those people who perhaps have underlying other conditions, and how you work across social care, mental health, community, to ensure that people are well cared for in an appropriate way. I think, full steam ahead, really. Sorry, Oliver.
Thank you, sir. Yes, and I mean, certainly that ties in with what we're trying to achieve in primary care at scale.
Indeed.
With our primary care homes, about trying to keep people out of hospital, keep people well. I think I would sound a note of caution. I mean, I think we have to be very careful, don't we, when we're reconfiguring services to make sure that, you know, where that work then goes, we have to acknowledge that that work hasn't necessarily disappeared. And so there will be a piece for finance and for Jackie and everyone to make sure that, you know, the resource does follow the work, and we don't just assume that work that has been avoided by one part has then just evaporated.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And I completely understand that and recognise, you know, around, is there an opportunity for rotational models that might create extra capacity for senior clinicians to work? I completely take your point and I understand that. Yeah, it just can't be just pushed into other areas that don't have the capacity to meet it.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I make a quick comment?
Please.
So, I just want to acknowledge Will's ambition for high quality care, because I do think it's absolutely vital, and I very much see myself as someone like Will, who's unapologetic for doing the very best that we can in all the circumstances we operate in. But it kind of underlines a point that, you know, quality is a progressive concept, and so we'll never really achieve quality if we look back and stand still. We have to look forward and be very adaptive and innovate. And what I get a lot of encouragement from what you said today is how we are open-minded to doing things differently and finding different ways of working to tackle problems that lie ahead for us. And I think if we can bottle that, Will, let's do that and give as many people a sip of that drink as we can, because we think that's so important for us going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We look forward to further updates.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will.
Have a
Thanks
good
for your
rest of the
time.
morning. Take care.
Thank you. So I move us on now to the committee chair's exception reports, noting that a large number of these meetings only took place last week. But I will ask committee chairs if there's anything. We've got two of the escalation reports in our pack, but I will ask other chairs if there's anything to bring to this board's attention at this time. So, Quality, Safety and Engagement Committee, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. A range of issues for noting, but for the board to be aware of and to escalate was that we had a presentation, a deep dive from General Surgery on the consent policy, and they were unable to provide assurance to the committee and have been asked to go away and to create a local action plan to take the work forward and to ensure that we do have the assurance that we need. Also coming out of that was that it became it's clear that our consent policies across the piece have not been updated for many years, and that we have again requested that a full policy review is undertaken in the area of consent policy. So that was the area that we particularly wanted to bring to the board's attention.
And do you have a date for when that will come back to the committee?
The General Surgery Action Plan will come back to the next meeting. I think that the full policy review is a longer-term piece of work.
Thank you. And ICP?
Nothing of note to escalate to the board.
Thank you. Nigel, Finance Performance.
Sarah, thank you. We met at Finance and Performance Committee meeting last week on the 29th of March, and as ever, it was a lively and long meeting, as you can imagine. I have been chairman of the Finance and Performance Committee for 2 years now, and I am delighted with the progress that we've made, particularly around the quality of the information performance reports that we get, the IPR, the work that's been going on behind the scenes in terms of business information, in collating that information. It's not wholly digitized yet, but we are getting more and more information so that we understand better and better where we are. The first year, as we know, was characterized by discovery, and there's no secret around that. Very challenging, and we felt that at Finance, we simply had storm after storm rocking our boats and blowing our trees over, and we feel as if we've recovered from that, but we now know where the issues lie, and we have visibility, and we have a lot of confidence around the accounting, and also, if I may say, the timeliness of that accounting. That's a huge improvement that has taken place. But, you know, the challenges persist, and this year in particular question, we will just miss our budget, just miss £5 million. It's a lot of money, but in the greater concept of things, it's probably just over 1% of our total budget. So I think one needs to put that into context, and I don't want to steal Jackie's thunder either from her reports. But I do want to raise a bigger issue, and that is that the elephant in the room here is that we face significant challenges around funding. And I don't want Manx Care to be held out to be a whinger, because there are some huge successes that we're also seeing, particularly in the area of the cost improvement plan, where we are outshooting our targets in terms of efficiencies. And I think we understand that there are efficiencies to be gleaned from the system, and they are ongoing, but the ask is very big indeed. In terms of our budgeting process and our forecasting process going forward, we've been beaten back considerably on our bids for budget at both department level and at Treasury level. And I think there is a perception that we need to socialise a bigger issue, both at this board. I bang on a lot at Finance and Performance about alignment of interests, alignment of expectations, and alignment of vision and mission. And I detect, and this is a slightly subjective feeling, but I detect we're at something of a tipping point here, in that we can no longer wring more blood out of the stone. And I think we have to be realistic, and we have to be realistic with our stakeholders and get this on the table, in that Einstein's definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think we have to look forward, maybe 10 or 15 years out, to see where we want to be and how we want to fund our service. Because, you know, Jonathan's report is 5 years old now. I think we adhere very much to the principles of that report, but can we afford the delivery of that report? And that is not something that is peculiar or alone as far as Manx Care is concerned. I also see Mr. Mann in the public arena, and Mr. Mann and I have not always seen eye to eye on everything, but there is a letter, a question for the board from Mr. Mann in this particular meeting, which I think is right on the money. No pun intended, literally right on the money, in that you know, we do have some shortfalls, we do have some challenges, and just looking at inflation alone, our budget grant will be eaten up, and that's just maintaining the service this year. So these are really, really big picture issues where we have to strive to come up with a plan, to come up with that magical alignment, and start to define where we want to be and where we can be in 10 years. And I'm sorry to sort of paint a slightly dark picture around that, because, you know, you've heard me many times say that money is a lubricant, not a propellant. And we've heard many examples at board meetings and this morning of how well we're doing in terms of getting the culture right and getting alignment in this space. But without money to fund it, we simply won't be able to deliver our vision, and we do need to get that on the table. So there you are, a bit of a challenging report from Finance and Performance, and I'm sorry, but I think it's important to get it on the table. I think it's important to socialise it. I think we have a duty of care to talk about it at these board meetings, and I look forward to our future discussions with both the department and Treasury going forward.
Thanks, Nigel. I think Jackie will talk more when it comes to your report, Jackie, but I think, this board must concentrate on issues of quality and compliance and make sure those are front and centre of our financial decision making, which I know you discuss at Finance and Performance Committee. And, we do have strong ambitions, but I think some of those ambitions will only be enabled by making very difficult decisions as we go through in terms of allocation of funding and resource. So, we presented to the Council of Ministers and, I ended that session by saying we are prepared to make difficult decisions and we must be and we continue to be. So thank you, Nigel, for that update. The chair of the Audit Committee has stood down from the board, Andy Guy. This is our first meeting without him. We're already missing him. But I don't think there was anything to escalate from audit from colleagues that were at the meeting to this board. No. Thank you.
And I will assume the chair of audit going forward.
I was about to say, and thank you for assuming the chair of audit going forward as we recruit our new non-execs. Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I can triangulate actually a few conversations from this morning into the D&I committee report. So firstly, let's talk about the item which says as an action item around the estate. So the estate is elderly, I think we can say, and not particularly up to speed in some of the latest patching and so on that we need to make sure that we have a safe and efficient environment. And that has been, and we've already talked about journeys of discovery this morning, that's been a journey of discovery of finding what kit is out there, who owns what, because we don't own it all. Some of it's GTS owned and so on. And we're now in the situation where we understand what the remediation might look like, and that's going to cost money. So that's the first thing. And there's a whole discussion around what is a sensible use of resource to do that. So that's part A. So that's just what we stick our stuff on, if you like. But the other conversation is the new stuff. And I'm going to triangulate with Oliver's remarks around the partial booking system. There is a big conversation going on around a Manx care record at the moment, which is the patient record, which is supposed to be the lubricant behind integrated care from a technology point of view, so that everybody can talk to each other, the ambulance, the GPs, the hospitals, so that there's no paper going between, each individual care provider. The issue is that is an enormously costly exercise, enormously costly. It's a once-in-a-generation thing to do. But the problem is, and we're having the conversation with the transformation team and with the government at the moment, but the problem is there is an enormous cost of doing nothing. And what Oliver was saying is a very good example of that. So we might be writing to people and saying your appointment is in 6 months' time, and there's some issues associated with that about do not attends. So if we do not put the Manx care record in, we will spend money doing stuff like that anyway. So there's a big understanding here that there is a big cost of doing nothing. So whilst the number of the Manx care record will be enormous, and as yet it's undefined, there is also an enormous number associated with the cost of doing nothing. And I really wanted to make that point. So for the next D&I committee, I've asked for a paper to come because I think we're out of time. In terms of getting the Manx care record project going, and the strategy has been to partner with Liverpool to do that. Liverpool obviously have their own problems. They've just been through their winter pressures and so on. And at the moment, they haven't really started their own procurement exercise, which puts us even further back because we are dependent on them. And I think because of things like Oliver's just said, I think we're out of time. So I've asked for an alternative paper to come to the next D&I committee. Think, what's plan B? Because we can't just keep coming to the D&I committee every time and saying, well, we're waiting for Liverpool, aren't we? Because we can't keep waiting. If we have aspirations to be the best small island healthcare system and all those things, we are out of time. So the two messages are, there's money around the remediation of the existing estate, but there's also an enormous amount of money associated with A, doing Manx care, but B, also not doing Manx care. So those are my takeaways.
Thank you. Any comments or questions, Katie? Oliver?
I'd just like to add as well, certainly from a practical experience when we've been dealing with talking about GP Opal and changing the codings in EMIS, which is our record system. There's a cost in the middle as well, which is the cost of this uncertainty. Yeah. So doing nothing and doing something, but at the moment the uncertainty that we have causes all of our decision making to be delayed, and that causes additional costs. And so I thought I'd just add that.
Thank you. Thank you. So the People Committee met on the 14th of March, just one item of escalation, but also, Anne, I'll ask you just to update on further conversations. So we're very keen as Manx Care to support the Retire and Return initiative and to make that much more attractive so that people can come back to work after they've retired. But we understood there were some issues with the pensions agency, but I think there has been further conversations since the meeting.
I don't think there's an issue with the pension age. I think they're very supportive of this. There will have to be wider consultation across government about any changes to the pension scheme, so obviously they have to take that into account. And also has to be some changes to government policy about retire and return. So those two pieces of work are in progress.
Thank you. Now, having chaired yesterday's meeting and running terribly behind, I'm delighted to announce that we're 15 minutes ahead. Amazing. So we'll have our 10-minute refreshment break and return at 22. Thank you. So we have the integrated performance report, and I will, in what order shall I ask people to contribute? In the order written here? Director of Nursing, Medical Director, Director of Social Care. Oliver, do you want to introduce it, or should we go straight to Paul?
I don't mind.
Yeah, may as well. So there's probably a couple of us will need to speak on this one. I'll speak for the bits I can talk on. I think, David, if you might want to say a few things.
Yeah.
All
Excellent.
right. Look, I think...
Can I just say before you start, Paul, that I'm just so pleased that we have got an integrated performance report that actually not only now has data in it, but also has some narrative in it. And I think as a board, we can start to really trust this information, look at this information, understand this information. And, you know, that's really important to note, I think. So, so please, over to you.
No, thank you
Paul.
so much. So, Chair, thank you for a few minutes just to say about the quality performance this month in February. I think I'd like to say start by saying it's been another good month for quality and safety overall. The highlights for us is that we continue to experience low exposure to serious incidents. We're now 19 consecutive months into without having a never event reported on the island, which is incredibly good. Strong reporting culture, as Will was saying before. Strong compliance with duty of candour is being maintained. Low exposure to medication errors that involve harm, as well as low exposure to falls that involves harm. Very good performance on primary infection prevention and control measures. Strong performance on blood clot prophylaxis. We continue to experience low exposure to what we call the alert organisms, which are MRSA, C. diff, and some gram-negative bacteremias. Our exposure to those is very low, which is a good thing. We've got improving position on mortality reviews, which is really kicked off now, which is really good to see. Strong performance on gender-appropriate accommodation. We continue to benefit from what I consider to be incredibly good, high satisfaction ratings from people who use our service, which is perhaps one of the most important measures that we measure in amongst our suite. Very good performance on complaints, particularly since we dealt with the backlog last year and since the new regulations came into effect. MCAL's responsiveness to people in need of support is frankly astonishing. It continues to be a very valuable service for people who need help, and the vast majority of issues that are raised can be dealt with there and then, which is incredible. Exactly what I thought would happen, but it's really encouraging. That's down to the leadership of the people on the ground who do that. The areas that I continue to work on, and I would like to just emphasise those if I may. I want to do a bit more work on universal screening for malnutrition. I do think this is a very important measure. We have had some performance improvement in February, which is incredibly encouraging, but I'd like to get this up to the very high, reliable performance measure of at least 95% for every patient admitted and for every patient who spends more than a week in hospital. So I've initiated a campaign to drive that forward in the organisation, and we'll definitely do that. I also want to continue focusing on work around recognising and responding to the signs of clinical deterioration. We are making some very good progress in this, but as you'll see from the work of the QSC, it's an area that I still want to have some further improvement on. And one of the spin-offs from that is we're getting better at planning, identifying the needs of people, particularly those who are approaching the end of their life. And that can make a massive difference to this particular measure. And that's well underway with strong clinical input from our clinical directors and frontline staff, as well as educating people to know what to do if you encounter someone who doesn't look very well and you didn't expect it. I do want to continue our work on antimicrobial stewardship. You'll notice there has been a deterioration in February. I can account for that, but I'm not. I think it's an area that reveals some of the vulnerability that we have. And the bottom line was, and it was the same this time last year, when a particular individual goes on leave, our performance drops. And therefore, I think that's revealing in terms of we don't have enough resilience in our approach to antimicrobial stewardship to function when that individual isn't there cracking the whip. I have engaged our clinical directors. They do understand my concern around this. And we are socialising this with the wider clinical teams with a view to finding ways in which we might be able to build resilience into that measure. So I do expect our performance to get back up to where it was, and want to continue to drive that one forward as well. And I think if I can, I'll probably pause there. If any questions or comments, I'll happily take them.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions or comments for Paul? No?
Thank you.
David, shall I come to you next?
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
Sarah. Can I just echo the comments around the kind of quality of the IPR report as well? So the first time I've seen this, really easy to follow, even for me, coming in fairly new, and really focused on what the key issues are. So I do like the narrative. From the social care perspective, mental health, some of the two issues for me that came across, one was around data confidence, which came out in a number of the comments and narratives generally. So lots of work going on around making sure that we are confident around data. So one example is where we're showing 0 for numbers of assessments that are shared with carers and service users is showing 0, which is not the case. That's now being looked at. We think it's around 60 to 70%, best guess at this stage. So there's some issues around that. The other one is around capacity issues. So the number of times, and I'm sure this is across all care groups, the capacity features in here in terms of we haven't got enough staff to do what we need to do in terms of some of the basics. So one area I will be focusing on is certainly around waiting times for assessments. And we know that that's dipped to around 33%. It should be 80% at the moment. A number of reasons for that. One, again, is data and about inputting. So staff don't always input what they should be inputting. So we're, again, working with staff to make sure we do that. And our capacity within our teams again. And we have got a recruitment campaign that's underway at the moment that hopefully will start to address that. So some of the waiting times that people are experiencing and the waiting list that we have should start to come down in the next month or so, providing we are successful with those recruitment campaigns generally. I think I'll pause there for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions or comments for David? Just thank you for that focus. I think that's a really important piece of work to try and bring down those waiting times. So thank you for that. Marina, is there anything you wanted to comment on?
I think there's two things. I mean, I've only just stepped in since Monday, but I think something that does need to be galvanised, and I use the word galvanised, is around getting the clinical directors and the associate medical directors to really encourage medical engagement in the core audits. This seems to be an issue, certainly for mental health, that was brought up by Dr. Wafer, who represents us at the audit committee, but also looking at Three's comments, there seems to have failed miserably in that area. So there does need to be an engagement from every directorate and get the medical engagement in doing the core audits that are required.
Thank you.
And it really requires everybody to take this with a personal interest rather than the horrible job that you have to do, because that's when you can get the real triangulation to achieve the excellence, and that then can get fed into people's job plans as well as quality improvement activity for their appraisals. Rather than having to do extra work for it, this becomes a part of your everyday work and really gets that enthusiasm. And I like to use the philosophy of joy in work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like a really good approach to something that is always a challenge, I think. The medical engagement piece it can be challenging. So I think taking that approach will hopefully reap benefits for us, and you have our support to do that, and anything we can do to help, please let us know. Thank you. Any other comments on the IPR? Tim?
Just something which I'm always interested to look at is readmissions, and I have had an informal chat, I think, at the end of the last board, and that's something which I think we struggle to collect. And I think readmissions is a really good indicator, and particularly for colleagues on the social care side, in terms of people who are being discharged and then need to be readmitted. And I just wonder whether there's any ability at some stage to get some data around readmissions.
We do have readmission data.
Oh, you do?
Within 28 days, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But I think
because of our traditional challenges around coding, it's sometimes difficult to correlate where an admission might be related to the initial admission, or, you know, so, but I will ask Al, now that we've got probably a good year's worth of coding data, whether we could look at that,
That's right, Oliver, because when we've looked at this before, the concern would be, or the index of concern would be, where there is a readmission within 28 days for the same HRG. Because you might, of course, go home and have something new happen to you, and it wouldn't necessarily be a concern.
But you're right. I think we should have sufficient interest in collecting readmission data and then use it to sort of drive that quality improvement piece.
Yeah.
And it may be that people are being readmitted for something different, but there might be some link in terms of whether somebody has a fall at home.
That's right. It could be a breakdown in the plan.
And are readmitted. So I think that's useful data.
I think sometimes there's usually a link as well, Tim, to whether or not it was a safe and appropriate discharge in the first place. So you can often correlate that back in as well. So that's important to know, isn't it? Whether we're getting the discharge right or not. Isn't always a link, but sometimes there is.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Oliver?
I'd just like to mention MCALs, which you touched on. I think it doesn't come across here, but it's a real success story, actually, MCALs, from the clinician's point of view. Patients seem very satisfied with it. So I think that's even beyond what you can see here. I think it's a real success.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you. We're very proud of it, and I think you know, they have come to present to the board in the past, but maybe that's something we can think about for the future.
Sarah,
yeah, Nigel.
Thank you. It's to do with MCALs as well. I'm just delighted and thrilled to hear what a success story it has been. My only query is that we seem in the medical profession to be absolutely hung up on acronyms, and MCALs means absolutely nothing to me. Can we not call it Manx Care Helpline?
Nigel, I'll happily have a look at it for you. It is a name we inherited, but I'm used to it. So it's the Advice and Liaison Service for people who have...
I think if you ask a member of the Manx public what does MCAL stand for, they'd look at you as if you had two heads. But if you said Manx Care Helpline...
All right, let me have a look at that for you.
It reminds me of my very first NHS board meeting 15 years ago, where there was an entire conversation about DNAs, which made no sense to me because I didn't know why we were talking about our genetic makeup in terms of wasting money and people not turning up. And so I agree with you. I think we are far too comfortable with the use of acronyms, and we should be much clearer about
my wife and I are both chemists, and we talk in acronyms. And Hey Heli Bebkanoff is the first line of the periodic table for this.
Moving on. Paul, to you, please, for the verbal CQC update.
All right, so Chairman, my update on this month is a relatively small one. I'm happy to report that the CQC inspection process for Manx Care is now concluded with the receipt of the mental health report, which has gone through the factual accuracy challenge process. I'm preparing high-level action plans for sharing with the Department of Health and Social Care towards the back end of April, and organising the teams so that we can start to drive and implement and embed the actions that we will take in response to the CQC findings, so that we're in a position to respond really well when they return in 2024.
And we are going to be presenting, as promised, that action plan report to the department by the end of the month.
Indeed, that's our plan. Yeah.
Thank you. I've just realised, Oliver, I didn't come to you about the IPR. Was there anything you wanted to highlight or add?
Just a few very quick points.
Apologies.
In terms of, I'm going to kind of do it split between going well and not so well. So from an ambulance point of view, we reached an average response time for Category 1 calls of under 8 minutes for the first time in over 2 years. The team are just analysing the reason for that. We think the soft launch of the Hear and Treat will have helped with alleviate some of the demand that we discussed earlier with Will, but we're just working out to kind of see whether that is going to be a sustainable improvement going forward. Again, we're seeing good progress around the recovery and restoration programme. So we've got a reduced inpatient waiting list size compared to this time last year of 35%, and 17% less of the day case waiting list. Predominantly that day cases are the cataracts, which, as I mentioned before, we are a longer tail for resolving the cataract waiting list, just because of the number of additions to the waiting list that get put on every day. So the actual progress of eliminating that waiting list is slower than other areas. In terms of cancer, we've got a mixed picture this month. We're maintaining our average of 15 days wait for an initial cancer referral, which we've reported pretty much consistently for the last couple of months, and we're continuing to see an increase in performance around 2-week wait. So patients getting their appointments within 2 weeks of referral. Our 28-day faster diagnostic standard is currently running at 66.2%. So that means that of those referrals, 66.2% of our patients receive their diagnosis within 28 days of referral. Last time I discussed some concerns around the time it takes between initial referral and treatment, so the 31-day and the 62-day standard. From a 31-day point of view, which is defined as from the date of receiving your treatment plan to actually having your first definitive treatment, our March performance of that was 94%. From a 62-day point of view, that has improved slightly from 33% to 50%. And that is, again, due to I mentioned last time that the challenges that the UK have got around cancer. But we are liaising with the Northwest or the Cheshire Mersey Cancer Alliance to start exploring that. So we're moving on to the cancer performance was a bit of a mixed bag, but I'd say we are looking at a overall an improving picture against all of those cancer standards, which is good. From a winter pressures point of view, I mentioned winter pressures earlier. Looking at February, we continued to see around a 5% increase in demand in February compared to the previous 12 months. We were on Opal for 2.5 days in February, which was down from 5 days in January. and our 4-hour performance for February was 70.5%, which is a few percentage points up of previous months. We did see a reduced number of trolley weights, so 27 12-hour trolley weights during February compared to 56 in January. And also that's reflected in the ambulance statistics, where there was a reduction of 60-minute or above handover times. So there was 34 of those in January, but that reduced down to 14 in February. So although we're continuing to see winter pressures, the impact of winter pressures during February, you can see that it's actually alleviating, and hopefully when I report back this time next month for the March position, then we will see further improvement. The only other thing to mention lastly is whilst we are making good progress around the inpatient waiting list, the outpatient waiting list is continuing to increase. So over the last 12 months, we've seen a 15% increase in the outpatient waiting list. So there's 15,000, just over 15,000 people waiting for an outpatient appointment. A lot of those will be cancelled off during the validation process. And the validation process, as I mentioned, is still ongoing, very much so across all those specialties. But our waiting time for a first outpatient appointment remains fairly static at around 49 weeks, which is clearly a long way that we want to be moving, we want to be at. The Phase 3 Recovery and Restoration Programme focuses mainly on outpatients, so looking at a way of revitalising the virtual outpatient model, which we know in the first attempt at that with Medifer didn't work particularly well. A lot of those issues relating to our ability to share data with Medifer, and also some challenges from a technology point of view, but we do want to retry that type of model, because we know that we don't have the resources on Ireland to be able to restore that waiting list ourselves. We don't have the resources to do it. And similarly to the inpatient recovery and restoration programme, there is significant productivity gains that we can make to get ourselves in a sustainable position. It's just this backlog that we need to get rid of. We are making some progress within certain areas. So ENT, for example, we've reduced the waiting list by 14%. Due to some additional waiting list clinics over the weekend, and also we are commissioning some additional activity within radiology. So funding has been moved from the Recovery and Restoration Fund to radiology to commission 1,300 scans across various modalities to try and reduce their waiting list. So we're making progress, but the real progress around the outpatient restoration will come when we submit Recovery and Restoration Phase 3, which is in its final stages of draft, that business case.
Thank you. Teresa.
I think we should have a very low tolerance for having 12-hour trolley waits. I do know we often are compromised with bed capacity, but I also see in the cases where we have looked into the reason for those delays, we are not great at escalating, and we are not great at doing specialty assessments and that clinical review in ED between surgical and medical teams, and those clarity of pathways. And I would point to the acute abdominal pathway as being an area where those cases can often get trapped between medical and surgical assessment. And I think we should make a commitment to have a reduction trajectory on 12-hour waits, and do a root cause analysis on anybody who is in the emergency department with a DTA, decision to admit, of over 12 hours. Because I do think if we get the escalations right and the pathways right, we could eliminate 12-hour trolley waits in this organisation. So I would respectfully ask the board to consider asking the executive to do that piece of work with a reduction trajectory which is overseen by the Quality and Safety Committee.
I think we would welcome that.
Welcome that, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most distressing experiences, and I think it's right to have that ambition, Teresa. Thank you. Any other points of clarification for Oliver?
Sorry,
Nigel.
may I just ask, these trolley weights, it's on this trolley weight. I have this dreadful vision of some poor soul waiting in A&E in a corridor with a blanket over them. And you know, that just absolutely horrifies me to my very core. And, you know, can you give us some assurance that that is not what is happening?
We don't have any trolley weights in ED. The ED isn't big enough to have people on the corridors, because the size of our ED is around 40% of what we actually need. But that's not the excuse. That's not the reason why we don't. It's, you know, as Sarah said, it's a horrific experience, and people who are on trolleys in corridors in EDs for 48 hours in the UK, which is still the case at the moment. Read a case just yesterday of similar, where somebody was on the trolley on the corridor for 48 hours. It's what we do is the ED is made up of, there's 10 individual rooms, and then there's a bay of 4 that's called, there's green resus, which is single rooms, then there's red resus, which is a bay of 4. We're never in a situation where there are more than, so we've got a maximum capacity of 16 people. We've never reached that, which means that the situations that we've been in, that we've never exceeded the amount of physical spaces that we have. So what will tend to happen is somebody has a longer wait in ED, we'll move them into one of those single rooms, we'll transfer them from a trolley into an actual bed, and we will feed them as you get the same food as you would on a ward. So the patient experience from a kind of a nursing point of view is very similar to what you would experience on a ward. The difference is in ED, it's a 24-hour department. There's the rough and tumble of ED at 2 o'clock in the morning. And if somebody's been in ED for a prolonged period of time, they don't want to be woken up at 2 a.m. on a Friday, kind of, because somebody's in who is making noise. So as Teresa said, a lot of those, you know, we've stopped the bed situation, which has been very challenging over the winter period, is now starting to alleviate. Most of last week we started the day in an Opal 2 situation, which means that the pressure on the hospital is, whilst it's not, you know, we haven't got loads and loads of beds, we're not in a pressured situation. We started the day with beds available. So the most likely reason for a long length of stay in ED is a prolonged kind of diagnostic period, or what Teresa mentioned around those particular cases where there's not a clear pathway between medicine and surgery, and they tend to, you know, people saying that's not me, it's medicine, and the surgeon saying that's not me, it's surgery. That is a situation where we do need to escalate that, and that is where quite often that doesn't get escalated. In those scenarios, the ED consultant has the kind of the final decision making around where that patient goes, but we're finding that escalation to the consultant and also to the senior managers on call doesn't happen. So those patients kind of remain within ED. It's a small number of patients, thankfully, but you know, those patients, whether they're small, they're still getting a poor experience, and that is now that we're moving out of the winter pressure period and do have more beds available, there's no excuse for those kind of prolonged waits for that reason. So
it is. So the project is very desirable to get that right, but a trolley wait is not quite as horrific as perhaps I first imagined.
I think that is a term that's imported from the UK, because
an extended length of stay in ED would be a better way of looking at it.
Yeah.
As Oliver said, we will move heaven and earth to make people feel comfortable, make sure they're fed and watered whilst they're waiting to be transferred into a ward. but we can do everything on a hospital bed, like pressure relieving care, nutrition, hydration, mobilisation. The only thing that's not good in an ED environment is you don't really have showers, and your access to toilets is restricted, and your privacy and dignity. And if it's very busy in an ED, you can sometimes be moved around to accommodate other people, which is disturbing for a lot of people. So I think we're absolutely committed to minimising the overall length of stay in ED. But whilst people might have an extended length of stay, we're determined to make sure the standard of care is as good as it can possibly be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other questions or points to Oliver? Yes, Oliver.
So the question of acute abdomens going between surgeons or medics, and I would add gynecologists as well, it's a three-way decision that needs to be made, is one that was vexing Nobles Hospital in 2012, when I worked in ED in 2012 here, and it continues to vex all hospitals in the UK. So if you manage to solve it, I think they'll be learning to share with the UK. They'll be very pleased to hear it.
Sell the Manx model.
Yes,
The Manx abdomen.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Don't call it a MAM. That's all I ask. Stick with Manx abdomen model. Excellent. Paul, to you, please, if we may.
So I think to some extent this builds on the conversation we've just been having, because when we do have people in ED, when it's busy and congested, the thing that you will need to deliver the great care are people on the ground to be able to do it. The standard of care can drop quite considerably if you don't have enough people. I have to say, the report I prepared for the board, I think, will give you a lot of encouragement and some very positive assurances that we're moving in the right direction. And very pleased to be able to report that the report itself is self-explanatory, but if I could just point out a few things. The international recruitment programme has, by and large, eliminated our Band 5 vacancy much faster than we had anticipated. And that's given us the opportunity to have a much more stable rota pattern in the acute sector. That's a massive achievement, and to be fair, and I'm looking at Jackie as well, I didn't think I'd be able to say that at this point. I have been briefing the board that it's been a slow start and it's taken some time. But actually, the colleagues that we've recruited through that programme have started to arrive on island, are starting to deliver care. It's stabilising our rotas and making things much better. And that's having a tangible benefit on reducing our dependency on high-cost agency as well. So, it underlines the point that I think we've been making here, that if you recruit substantively to a full establishment, it saves you money and simultaneously delivers much higher standards of practice. And I think that's starting to show. This situation will continue to improve as we go into the midsummer as well. So our rotas will get even better and more stable as our colleagues in the pipeline begin to land. We have, because of that improving picture, we've made some decisions to slow down the pipeline of international recruitment because we can, and focus our efforts now on increasing the domestic production of trainees as the primary mechanism for tackling the risk that lies ahead around the potential for people to activate their retirement plans. And that's looking good as well. Subject to people getting the grades that they would need to get on the programme, that we will be able to increase the numbers going into 2023. And again, as I point out in my report, subject to how the profile of retirement plays out, there's a lot of uncertainty around whether people will activate retirements or won't, depending on inflation and other things in their lives. It's very difficult for me to predict with certainty how that's going to play. So I am going to adjust the numbers of trainees on an annual basis, depending on what that profile, the best intelligence we have. And also the numbers of people we can attract. But those two things together, the plan that I put before the board and the board endorsed around building our workforce models to the national standards, which we did, recruiting substantively where we can, filling our gaps with international recruits to stabilise the rotas and build a plan for the future, is really beginning to pay off. It's very, very encouraging to be able to say that to the board. I think that's by and large would apply to everything I've said there, to the acute sector. I think it would be remiss of me not to identify that we still got some hotspots where we've got some concerns, and in those hotspots I anticipate continuing to require to use temporary workforce for a period of time. Those areas are difficult to recruit to, areas where there is not just a national problem, there's a global problem with the supply of competent clinical workforce. And by and large that relates to maternity, children's care, children's and neonatal care, I think I'd add in there, and child and adolescent mental health. There are also some allied health professionals that would fall into that category too, where we have some difficulties, not just recruiting, but the supply of colleagues is not there. Speech and language therapy, for example, some aspects of radiology like sonographers are highly specialised, very sought after, very difficult to acquire colleagues. So there will still be some need, I think, for agency or bank in some circumstances, but I don't want to take away from the fact that I'm very pleased to be able to give positive assurance to the board. We made some very brave decisions against quite a bit of opposition, and actually it's turned out to be the right call for Manx Care and for the people who use our services, and I'm very pleased to say that.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very pleased to hear that.
Please, Jackie, yes.
Paul's described very well the position that we find ourselves in as we are, but I think the other thing the board needs to be aware of is that looking forward, whilst we filled our budgeted establishment with our band fives and we're comfortable we've gotten as far as we can, there's still some gaps between what we budgeted for and what safe is, but the board has committed to making some investment in the coming year into bridging that gap, and I think some of the analysis that we've been doing together has suggested that perhaps the gap is not as wide as we had feared this time last year. So I think it's really positive, not just in terms of stabilising now, but actually being able to continue to bolster that workforce going forward.
Thank you, Jackie. That's a really good point. So that even gives us more optimism that as we go forward in 23 and 24, we will get to a steady state and a resilient staffing position, which I think is fabulous.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Thank you, Paul. Really, really good news. Update on pay negotiations.
So if I start, and then maybe Anne will supplement what I'm about to say. So,
sorry, Teresa, would you like to?
So I think last time at the board we heard how positively our relationship with staff side is progressing. You know, we have been able to move forward on the partnership arrangements, the joint agendas around policy, etc. And I think that's really encouraging. However, on the pay negotiations, I think it would be remiss of me not to remind the board that we have been in dispute around pay with our collective staff side for 2 years now. So the 21-22 pay deal remains in dispute. The 22-23 pay deal, so we've just come out of that year, remains in dispute. And as we have been allocated 2% in our baseline budget for 23-24, the likelihood is this will run into a third year of pay dispute with our staff side organisations. And I think that starts to become a real risk to the work we are trying to do. You know, I'm encouraged the fact that we continue to have constructive dialogue and relationships with our staff side organisation, but this is not getting resolved. The board has always taken the decision to hand over as much as what we have received in our budget and offer that as a pay award, even supplementing that at times from our baseline budgets, and have taken the decision as a board to pay our staff as soon as we've made that decision as a board, despite being in dispute. So the position we are in at the moment is that the BMA have rejected our pay award, and we are sort of continuing to have dialogue with them, but we know we can offer no more. So we're waiting for them to indicate their next steps. For our podiatrists, they are also waiting for us to come back with any improved offer, but realistically we know we can't improve that offer. For the Royal College of Nursing, we have received feedback on their ballot, which is, it was a high turnout and it was unanimously in favour of action. So 87%, I believe, of those members balloted are in favour of taking action. Now, I think we just need to be mindful of when that action may hit, because we are moving into a period of summer, of TT planning, and whilst we don't know exactly the details of when the action could be taken, I think there is a significant risk the board should be aware around our planning for the TT. The other union is Prospect. And I feel as though, as a board, we can't do anything further. We can't offer any more around the 21, 22, 22, 23. And I know that offering 2% into 23, 24 is just going to be completely unacceptable. And I think there is a wider discussion now as to how we move this forward constructively, how we take that wider analysis of pay deals across Wales, Scotland, England, but I believe that given the risks, particularly the Royal College of Nursing position, which is very clear, their position is very clear, we have to escalate this to broader discussions via the DHSC, into Treasury and COMIN, so we understand the impact of this and how we eventually break a level of deadlock, which, as I say, I do not want to have a third year of dispute with our staff side on this matter. Is there anything else you'd wish to say, Anne?
I think the BMA, obviously, it's just this last year that we're talking to them about, and they have indicated a willingness to continue discussions via the Manx Industrial Relations Service. So we will progress that. But as Teresa said, there's nothing more on the table. So it's difficult to see how we will satisfy the through with that discussion happening.
Nigel, yes.
I feel we're fighting a duel here with a blindfold on, and that we have responsibility without power, which is the worst of all combinations. And it works equally the other way. I think this goes right to the root of, if you like, my introduction to finance and performance, and indeed questions from the public, thank you, Mr. Mann, in terms of where we are and where we're going here. Because on the one hand, we're getting so much right in terms of culture and in terms of engagement, and we appreciate and welcome our staff, and yet money is one crude way in which we reward ourselves. It's only one, but you have to pay the bills. And, you know, with 2% on the table and food inflation at in excess of 10 or 12, you know, we're eroding the very baseline of people's livelihoods. And if you then take that into a wider prospect of 20% full-time employees down across the piece, we want people banging to get in, not dragging them over here. Where we're doing one thing and saying another, and it will reach a crisis point.
I think it's also worth mentioning that the Royal College of Midwives remain in dispute with us, and I think, as Paul mentioned, that's a particularly hard to recruit area.
So I think I completely agree, Teresa, with your points and with Nigel's. We do not have the ability to offer our staff more. And therefore, I think this absolutely is at a point where the board must escalate this to the department and to Treasury. And I think one of the questions that we would like an answer to, if I may be as bold, is what is the government's position on public sector pay on the island, because we are not alone in these challenges. These challenges are within education, within some of our blue light service colleagues. So we need a solution for the island. 3 years is an unacceptable position to be in. And, you know, we heard earlier both in your report and in Oliver's about TT preparedness. You know, we cannot be in a position where we are seeing strike action at a moment in time for the islands when we absolutely need our staff to be available to us and to the people of the Isle of Man and its visitors. So I think the board would fully support your approach, Teresa, to escalate this in the most serious of circumstances and really to look for some leadership across government as to how we can be enabled to resolve this, because as Nigel said, we can't keep fighting with a blindfold on and perhaps our arms tied behind our back. So you have our full support.
Thank you. I think we should discuss it board to board and perhaps
This afternoon.
at least float
Yeah.
update this afternoon.
Absolutely. Jackie.
Thank you. So, finance. I shall start with some good news, which is that we have met our 10 million SIP target for this year. It's important to note that 7.3 million of that has been actual cash out savings. That represents more than 3% of our overall budget and far exceeds our built-in target of 4.3 million. So the extended SIP was our response to the funding pressures that we spotted earlier on in the year. And an enormous amount of work has gone into that. We want to put a vote of thanks on the table for Treasury, Government and Transformation in terms of facilitating some additional investment of resource that's helped us to achieve that. But I think that's really, really positive news. It's also the work that's carried on in the SIP in this year has laid the foundation of a similarly ambitious SIP plan for next year. We're looking at a similar amount of savings in next year, around about the 10 million mark. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Unfortunately, as Nigel referred to earlier, whilst we've been signalling in recent months that we had anticipated achieving a balanced position, with a risk factor, shall we say, of around about 2 million. In recent events have meant that now we're likely to hit 4.5 million overspend in the year. Obviously, this is incredibly disappointing for us as a board. We've worked very, very hard and done a lot during this year to try and achieve that position. Ambitious, I recognise, in terms of the context and the history of the health services, not just on the Isle of Man, but more widely. But nevertheless, we set the target for ourselves, and it is disappointing we haven't met it. In terms of some of the reasons behind that, one of the key areas that's caused us concern, particularly in the final quarter of the month, has been the volatility around tertiary activity. So tertiary activity is the activity that we do off of island, and that's continued to move significantly. Part of that is because we've started to initiate much more analysis and in-depth analysis of what's going on there. So we've actually had visibility of this stuff. Very often what happens is we don't really have an understanding of the tertiary spend until maybe month 1 in the following year. So whilst it's not good that we have it, I think the fact that we're seeing it now rather than after the event is, I'm looking for a silver lining here, but it is a slight positive there. We initiated a number of back to balance measures in the last couple of months, again in response to the worsening position. And those measures have generated a positive move of close to 3 million, 2.9 million. A big part of that is there was a big drive to focus on some of our agency spend to try and address some of those positions. And I'm pleased to report that in February we saw a reduction of 300k in the month in our agency spend, and we expect that to continue into March. Now, I know that some of those decisions will have been temporary in nature and risk assessed on the basis that we can manage for a period of time, so I would expect that to go up again. However, just bringing in what Paul has mentioned earlier about our international recruits, that work has contributed a saving of close to 500,000 in this year alone in terms of avoided bank and agency cost, and we expect that to continue into next year. And similarly across the piece, particularly in our medicine care group, a lot of emphasis has been placed on recruiting substantively to vacant posts. So whilst our vacancy rate has maintained a level that would appear there's been no movement over the year, what we're seeing from a financial perspective is some of those very high cost vacancies that must be filled and must be covered have actually been recruited to in the year. So we are expecting to see a continued decline and tailing off of that high cost agency spend, because that's the key thing that's driving a lot of our difficulties. And again, looking forward into next year's SIP, there's a continued focus on recruiting substantively where we can and continuing to drive down agency spend. So that's the current year position. Are there any questions on that before I move on to next year's position?
Any comments or questions?
Other than just to say what a phenomenal achievement that is. I mean, Jackie's been very modest there. That is a massive success on many levels for Manx Care. In very difficult circumstances, we're still coming out of a pandemic. We had all our problems with staffing. We had the worst winter on record, and yet we're delivering news like that on finances, which I think is incredible.
Thanks, Paul. It's worth noting that the overspend represents about 1.5% of our budget. Our overspend last year was 3% of our budget. And when I look at our actual spend levels, taking budget out of the equation, our actual projected spend this year is about 10% more than it was last year. So again, against a backdrop of rising inflation and costs and all of those things, I think what it represents is probably just about standing still.
Yeah. Yeah. Teresa?
Yeah, no, I would just want to echo that really. You know, we know from the information published by NHS providers in the UK, most organisations are saying anything above a 1.5% CIP is unachievable in this context of trying to recover waiting lists, of trying to recover after the pandemic, of having the significant workforce challenges. So I think, you know, £10 million worth of cost improvements from a standing start. So a CIP programme didn't exist 18 months ago. So standing start in terms of compilation of all that work. And I would also like to put on record thanks to Jackie, who has driven this and worked so closely with operational colleagues so they understand the meaning of what's required and are supported to deliver. Because this has been such an inordinate amount of work to do that translation piece, to put the capacity in and to generate the information. And, you know, we are a world away from where we started 2 years ago in terms of the level of oversight, reporting, the grip, the buy-in from staff, the understanding and evidencing the delivery of. And when we can absolutely demonstrate that we have significantly improved the quality of care and delivery whilst improving the culture of the organisation, whilst having much stronger financial governance and achieving much more against our financial targets, I think we have to reflect on the second year of Manx Care as we go into year 3 as being a huge success, as being much better than year 1 and something from which we will continue to improve upon. And I think it is important the board, against an inordinate amount of work, just reflect that point. Improvements in safety, and just that figure alone, that our recruitment of substantive nursing posts, getting quality better and up to establishment, has yielded £500,000 worth of savings. That in itself should be the headline, and I hope that is acknowledged more broadly going forward.
Thank you.
I'd just like to echo that one, Teresa, in terms of we view this, we have this constant tension between quality, safety, transformation and finance, and they're not always aligned. And I think what the position we find ourselves in reflects the fact that whilst we've done all we can to protect our finances, we've acknowledged that there are things we could have chosen to do as an organisation and as a board that would have absolutely delivered financial balance, but it would have left the organisation in an untenable position. And I think we've achieved a good balance of achieving improvements in quality and safety without throwing the money out the door, and vice versa.
Thank you. And I think, you know, to have come in so close to balance, I know that will have been incredibly disappointing to you, Jackie, but I think you must hear that the board is incredibly thankful and grateful for the work that you've done, the really hard work that you've done, and indeed that the organisation has done under your leadership. Exactly. And I was really pleased to attend a Let's Connect where, you know, I heard firsthand, you know, all of the care groups responding to your request to look at how they could take some cost out and limit spending. Yeah. I think it's also worthy of noting that to take £10 million out in a cost improvement plan and for 3/4 of that to be cash is an extraordinary achievement. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I'd just like to echo what you've said, Sarah, is that I have a unique position in Manx Care in that I don't actually make spending decisions. That's delegated to the rest of the organisation. And I'm really pleased to see that we have, as you say, the whole culture around finance has changed. I see now this idea that people are beginning to understand what they're responsible for. They're engaging much more closely with our finance team in terms of asking questions and volunteering opportunities. And I think the SIP programme has helped to release a lot of innovation in the system. It's not really been perceived as a very negative cost-cutting, getting money out of the system exercise. It's been very much viewed as an opportunity to do some of these things that we've always wanted to do, that we know are good for the system and save money.
Thank you.
So then we moved to next year, 23-24 financial year, which is no less challenging and in some senses is probably more challenging than this current year. And I thank Mr. Mann for some of the helpful comments that he's submitted to us ahead of time. As I've mentioned to him earlier, he must have been in my brain and reading my mind, so you're very much on the ball in terms of what the board's thinking is. So it's no secret and it's no surprise that the amount of funding awarded for Manx Care for 23-24 was significantly behind what Manx Care had sought as part of the funding envelope for next year. In response to that, a significant amount of work has gone on in terms of identifying what those cost pressures are, prioritising those cost pressures, and we've talked about that at this board before. And then understanding what we can do to bridge that gap as much as possible. As we've mentioned before, our number one priority is our core safety and compliance. So in terms of understanding how we dish up or divide out our additional money for next year, that sits at the forefront. And things like the investing in the nursing workforce, investing in training and delivery is also giving a mind to that future development. But obviously there's limitations to what we can do. Just to give you an idea, in terms of what we would determine new money, so let's take inflation out of the piece for a moment, and let's just look at our growth funding. Our net growth funding for 23-24 is 4.3 million. And that's not a lot to do all of the things that we wish to do. So as I mentioned before, Manx Care is committed to delivering another extended SIP for next year. That then will bring our pot of new money for allocation up to 9.3 million for 23-24. We also have access to the DHSC Reserve Fund of 6.5 million. So our response to the funding pressures is to increase the amount of headroom we can create internally within Manx Care, to utilise the DHSC Reserve Fund as far as we can to generate and to invest in new things, and then to seek additional funding from other funds within Treasury, such as Healthcare Transformation Fund, capital funding, to respond to some of those. Now, obviously, there's risks associated with each one of those, but I think Manx Care's ability to take care of its core, I think we're reasonably confident in. the DHSC is relatively flexible and quite aligned with us in terms of how we might utilise the reserve. They've been very supportive this year. The real risk lies in whether we can secure additional funding outside through healthcare transformation and capital funding. So if any of those funding streams don't come through, then that funding pressure will come back into Manx Care. We have a session with the DHSC this afternoon, a board-to-board session, to go through some of those priorities and some of those funding decisions in detail. And it's at that meeting that we will collectively as a system agree. As Sarah mentioned, there are some difficult decisions in there. There are some difficult choices that we've had to make in order to make the finances work. And once we have a position on what that looks like and an agreed position with the department, I think we can start to communicate what that looks like. What I can say is that there aren't any measures in that involve decommissioning services or cutting services back. But the reality is that we will probably struggle to keep up with current demand. And that's the impact I think we'll probably see more than anything else in the coming year, is not that services will retract and services will contract, but that they won't be able to accommodate the level of demand that we see coming through the system. And that's where some of the measures we've talked about around deflecting care, moving things around the system and avoiding costs are really, really important to try and mitigate that. And then just talking about some of the key pressures for next year, obviously inflation is a key one. Staffing costs, as we've talked about, is absolutely key. And our funding pressures figure does not allow for staff pay awards over and above 2% next year. So anything over and above that sits outside that again. We've done a little piece of modelling to look at what a 5% pay award across the board was, and that creates an additional £7 million of pressure for us, which clearly would be impossible for Manx Care to really accommodate. We've got the COVID vaccination programme and the continued endemic response to COVID, which up until this year has been funded separately from Treasury. That funding falls away, so all of those ongoing costs land in Manx Care's baseline. We need to accommodate those. They are close to £1 million in the year, which is significantly less than what we've been spending on COVID up until now, which has been in the multiple millions. So we've done an enormous amount of work to rein in the spend on those areas and minimise the impact on Manx Care, but obviously that's significant. We continue to have challenges around the volume and complexity of some of our individual social care placements that are coming through the system that we must respond to, and continued challenges around our Section 115 costs. So this is our mental health placements, where rather than simply taking care of the therapeutic and clinical costs associated with these, we're having to accommodate all of the accommodation and hotel costs associated with those too. So those three things, and as you say, we've got the winter planning was funded last year by the DHSC. That has now become part of our baseline in this year. And again, we will continue to see pressure in terms of agency costs. So whilst we're doing an enormous amount of work to reduce those, they will continue, as Paul has mentioned, there'll be key areas where there will just continue to be a pressure for us. So then in terms of the SIP for next year, just to give you a flavour of where we're going with that, again, we continue to expand that. We'll continue with the current work we have around medicines optimisation, around consolidation of our purchasing of our clinical supplies. We have plans now to move out and do more around our non-clinical spend and look at opportunities for rationalisation across our wider estate. Catering, I think, is an opportunity that comes to mind for us. We're also initiating a large-scale piece of work to look at the social care area in terms of what efficiencies we can deliver in there, in terms of the models of care, the models of delivery, and just do a review of what actual day-to-day efficiencies we can do in some of our facilities that allow us. We're doing some work around further understanding of the tertiary pathway to gain a level of control and visibility over that, so we can make sure that at the moment when stuff goes off island, we have very little control over that. There's no filter that does that check that says, is that actually the right pathway for this patient? So once the work has been done, there's very little you can do. You have to honour your commitment. And in addition to the recruitment effort that we're talking about, there's also some work around implementing and devising some enhanced controls over some of our workforce spending decisions. So the single biggest area of spend in our organisation is on our workforce, and it's really trying to get under that, our flexible workforce, if you will, our bank, our agency, our on-calls, our rotas, all of those sorts of things, is just trying to get a level of visibility and control over those so we can understand the decision-making that sits behind many of those, and I think that will help to suppress some of our costs as well. So that's the main areas of focus for the SIP programme for next year.
Thank you, Jackie. Any comments or questions for Jackie? Katie?
So you talked a lot about the increasing pressures. Have we got definitive data on the growth in population on the island, both in the last couple of years and in fact the forecast, and have we used those numbers in what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the understanding of what the funding pressures for 23-24 are primarily driven by existing cost pressures we know about. What we have done is, as Andy Guy has done an excellent piece of work where he's taken the latest census data and projected that forward. So it's very Isle of Man specific, and we've added some money into that, and that's part of that model that sits in my Finance Director's report that clearly shows that even on our current spending trajectory, we are still sitting below what that modelling suggests the system should cost, but we are still sitting above what the projections of funding will be, and it's addressing that gap between, we're not saying we should increase our costs to meet what the population projection saying, it's we need to bridge that gap between our funding projection and our spend projection. Big part of that will be reducing our spend projection, but similarly a big part of that will be understanding how we can resolve the funding gap as well. Nigel.
Jackie, could I just tease out another point on the projections going forward? The projections that Andy worked up, where we're looking at Jonathan Michael, costs, etc. Does that include an increase in population, and does that factor in our vision for the island plan, growing the population?
No, the projections we're working off at the moment are based on just projecting our current population forward. So actually, when you look at population projections, if you ignore the impact of the island plan ambitions, we're projecting little growth in our overall population, and in fact a very, very small decline in our overall population figure. What we're seeing is that the proportion of that population that now sits in the 65 plus category, which is where the burden lies, will just continue to increase. Obviously, we've done some initial modelling in terms of what the impact of that projected 10,000 might be. And what we're seeing is that initially there's not a huge impact of that, because the projected group that we're bringing in is that smaller, lower costed, the younger age group. But obviously over time, that population will also continue. So as you go 20, 30 years out, then you just have the problem again. But yes, for now, it's the aging of the population rather than its growth that's causing the demand.
So supplementary then, and I have another special interest to declare in that I am in that group of over 65s, hopefully going to be around for some time longer. But I think it does perhaps behove us to look at some modelling going forward in terms of modelling island plan aspirations together with reality and matching those two equations up, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a piece of work, we're just figuring out how best to approach it. In terms of modelling that macro position, but also doing some more detailed work about understanding what's in our cost base. So what does it cost us to deliver each service? And that's, as our data matures, our ability to do that piece of work also matures. So we've had ambitions to do some activity-based costing exercises from the outset, but it would have been pointless to do them before now because we didn't know, we couldn't accurately measure our activity. There are still gaps, but I think there's an ambition in 23-24 to really try and get under the skin of that a little bit, because what that allows us to do then is to determine, in terms of assessing what an appropriate budget might be for an individual area on a reasonably scientific basis rather than a historic basis, which is what we got at the moment.
Thanks, Jackie. David?
Similar point to Nigel's, really. So in terms of those projections, Jackie, do they assume that we do nothing different to what we're doing now, or does it take into account the kind of initiatives that we have and the proposals going forward, And if we implement them, what impact will that have?
So what you see in my report assumes we just continue as we are. Trying to get to a scientific view of what all of those different things that we might do, the impact that they have, is incredibly difficult. But I think we've got some high-level views of, you know, if it could take £5 million out of the system a year in terms of either cost avoidance or actual cash, then you would see that curve start to bend. But I think it's important to recognise that no matter how much we bend that curve, its trajectory will continue to just be upwards. And I think that's widely recognised in terms of health and social care. We're never going to get to a situation where we're spending less than we did before.
Until 2060.
I hope not to be here by then.
Once the baby boomer population has passed through, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but not for most of the people around this table, unfortunately.
Teresa and then Tim.
So I think when I sort of try and think about summarising the position we are in going into 23-24, you know, we collectively absolutely take responsibility for working within the financial envelope that we have been given. And our duties and responsibilities are to agree how that funding is best spent. And I believe that we did that yesterday in private board and agreed from a Manx care perspective how best our budget allocation for 23-24 should be deployed and used. We now have to go through that next stages of ensuring that the DHSC agree with our assessment of what can and can't be funded going into 23-24. And indeed, what can't be funded has to be appropriately impact assessed. So we have to understand the consequence of that decision from a clinical and service delivery perspective. And I think the bit that we must quantify and understand is what that means for demand and delivery. So I think going forward, we will need to place some effort on a framework which brings to the board the impact of those decisions, so we can be clear and transparent with the public and also formally report that as part of the mandate process. I think it's fair to say that the budget we agreed yesterday does not allow us to do everything that we have been mandated to do. So that's a really clear statement that there are some decisions to be made in conjunction with DHSC about which bits of the mandate are more important than others and which things we can perhaps do at slower pace or defer for a year. But as we have signed off our very comprehensive response to the CQC action with an action plan, some of those will automatically capture some of the recommendations of the transformation programme and the 26 recommendations from Sir Jonathan Michael, and also they will incorporate some of the mandate requirements. But I would, we've always been clear as a board that quality and safety and compliance is of paramount importance to us as a board. And therefore, I think that CQC action plan, as extensive as what it is ultimately what we have committed to deliver. And that should be the basis of our discussions going forward. But we equally have to be very clear and transparent about the things that just can't happen over the next 12 months because of that, of our commitment to work within the financial envelope we've got. I think we have done a really great job of doubling the level of headroom by our own efforts. So as well as the additional investment, we have contributed internally to creating £5 million worth of headroom, which can be put back into service delivery, and we'll continue to strive to find more. But I do think this is an incredibly challenged position, and one that will need to spend an awful lot of board time ensuring we understand the impact and communicating the impact of that going forward.
If I could just supplement that, Sarah, and just, it's been implied, but just to explicitly state that the proposal that the board agreed yesterday allows us to remain within our financial funding envelope for next year.
Yes.
I think it was inferred, but I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Tim.
I just have the level of concern that other board members have. Wanted in particular to highlight social care and the way that that budget is hard to manage in terms of need, and also our legal duties in terms of people who present with need. And while the funding arrangements are different on the island for adults in terms of their support needs, I think that's again, we just need to be really clear that that's a part of the budget which is difficult to control. And also, just the other thing to say is that talking about the population growing, being a younger population group, my experience from elsewhere is that often the younger age group do bring older relatives to live closer to them over a period of time. So while the conversation might be about younger people moving, there are inevitably then older people move who already have care needs and may be being supported elsewhere with those care needs, who then transfer, and the funding then has to be picked up by us.
Part of the modelling going forward in terms of that population growth has included an element of that last surviving relative piece, but it's general at the moment.
Thank you.
Quite right.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Jackie? I think, you know, we are very pleased to be meeting with the department this afternoon for our board-to-board session. And I think, you know, we are very clear that our commitment to remain, as you have stated, Jackie, within our funding envelope is absolute. But therefore, we have to make some difficult decisions about what is delivered against that. I think it's also important to say that this isn't about cutting services. This is about doing things differently and prioritising those things that we are being asked to deliver. So thank you very much for that very detailed account of both where we are, but also what we're facing in the future. Nobody asked for any other business items, so I conclude the formal meeting. And Mr. Mann, thank you so much for your contribution and the questions. As Jackie and I reflected in advance of the meeting, we felt that you perhaps had attended the Finance and Performance Committee meeting, but you obviously have taken a great interest in Manx Care over the years. I would also, before I invite you to ask any additional questions, want to put on record and thank you absolutely for your incredible letter about Andrew and your thoughts and comments, which were incredibly moving and very comforting to us as a board. So thank you for that. We have. Any other questions you'd like to ask us?
Yes, well, just to put some gloss on the question that I did ask, which has been, well, I think fairly well comprehensively answered around the table.
Thank you.
It's how we've arrived at this position which is the important thing, because it's clear that the board have met with Komen, but the missing piece of the jigsaw is that you haven't actually met with all 24 members of our government. And to those who are unfamiliar with the island's government, there is no official opposition here. And those who are not taking an active part in the Council of Ministers are frequently loath to be critical of the Council of Ministers because, effectively, they hope one day perhaps to become a minister themselves. And so it takes quite a lot to promote an objection in the House. And the significance of the meeting that I attended the other night with Mrs. Cope attended was that the Minister admitted that when the mandate came up for approval, nobody from amongst the 24 spoke out against it. Now, I managed to speak to one of the backbenchers who remained nameless the other day, and he said that effectively they didn't speak out against it because they thought the figure was fine and had been agreed. And so the other side of the picture wasn't given to half of the government. So the question has to now be asked is whether in fact when the matter came up for approval, whether those members were in some way either short of relevant information or, worse still, actually misled into thinking that it was a done deal, that Manx Care was happy with the figure that they had been given. Now, we know from what the Minister agreed, I put to him a shortfall of 9 million, which was simply based on the overrun of inflation. That had the backbenchers in Timble been aware of the fact that you were 9 million short to start off with. As Lawless has been kindly pointed out that in fact just last year your increase was 10% on the previous year's expenditure. So if we take the 9% inflation and the 10% extra on last year, the figure that you've come up with at the moment of 39 million shortfall for the next year is such a colossal sum that I feel that had the backbenchers in the government been aware of that situation, there would have been a much more critical debate. And therefore I wonder now whether we have to actually, the question that now has to be asked is, firstly, how you achieve that not happening again. And I would suggest that having a good presentation to all members, all 24 of them, ahead of the mandate being agreed at some suitable venue needs to be something for the future. Now, whether in fact there's any benefit now in convening a presentation now to point out what you've done round the table here, because I think most members of the public, had they been able to be sat here and listened to the concerns that you've all got, would be mortified. And you've only got to look at the message that goes out to any member of your staff or any person thinking of coming here to work. That message now comes clearly through that it's not Manx Care's fault, but in fact when they all sat in government to agree the budget, well, they threw aside Jonathan Michaels. They've given a smack in the teeth to their staff, and to you now they're presenting you with an almost impossible task going forward. So I take on board the comment that the board doesn't wish to be seen as whinging, but please, I'm quite happy to do the whinging. I'm one out of 85,000 people on this island, but just because they're not here and haven't had the advantage of hearing what you have to say, I hope in the broader media that actually it's well reported that the island's government has sold its people down the river on this. They wanted Jonathan Michaels. They were prepared to pay for the report. You've struggled through 2 years, you're going into year 3, and now they've cut the money off. So that's the point I would make, and I hope that out there in the wider world that's taken on board.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mann. Excellent reflections, thank you. In an ideal world, we would have receipt of next year's mandate now. So in an ideal world, we would know exactly what the Department of Health and Social Care wish to mandate us for next year, 24-25, now. So we could work up the funding requirements and they could be part of the budget submission to Treasury in July. And that is, I think, a shared aspiration. The Department of Health and Social Care recognise that that is important. You are quite right in that at the moment, because we don't get the opportunity to approve the mandate. We can't say, no, we're not doing it. But what we can say is the mandate requires us, or requires the DHSC to identify the funding lines attached to each of those mandate objectives. And which is why, you know, the content of the mandate itself is all things that we would want to do. So there's nothing contentious about the content of the mandate, but what we had very, very explicitly said back in our letter of response to the mandate is, yes, we are very happy to do these if the funding is available to do them. And at the moment, we have £7 million worth of cost pressure associated with delivering those mandate requirements, which are below the line of what we can afford to do. So that's the harsh reality. At the moment, we have a mandate which is unarguable in terms of its content and our aspiration to deliver, but at the moment, we don't have the funding identified. The board-to-board discussion with the Department of Health and Social Care is to agree which bits are the most important and how we would wish to proceed with that. But the way of addressing this going forward is that we work a year in advance. So now we would receive next year's mandate indicative indications, which allow us to put in the proper funding submissions. And then if those funding submissions aren't materialised, then it doesn't materialise in the mandate. So you don't have that disconnect between what the mandate says and what Manx Care says it can deliver. Yeah, I think it's eminently solvable, and DHSC have acknowledged this position, and it's something we'll work forward, you know, to try and improve it. But you're right, it is wrong that we have a level of disconnect, and it's not fair on the public to be misled in terms of what we think we are going to be able to do, and then the harsh reality of what we can afford to do. Doesn't stack up.
Thanks, Teresa. Any other comments from or questions rather, from any other members of the public? No. Okay, that concludes the meeting. I think I would just like to reflect that I think we've got two very important documents that are serving the board very well in the BAF and the IPR. I think we have made the decision which we discussed at the last board meeting about Ballysalla, which I think presents us with an opportunity to look at primary care and the modelling around that, and the offer that we might be able to offer into GPs. I think it was really inspiring to hear from Will about what's happened in the ambulance service and his vision for the future. And I think we've got some massive challenges around the money, both in terms of how we deliver on our staff side and the pay negotiations, and keeping our staff on side with us and with delivering for the people of the Isle of Man in very challenging circumstances. We, I think, should take a moment to reflect on bringing the budget in last year so very close to balance, not quite there, but so very close. And to thank Jackie and the team for the work that's been done on the SIP delivery. And I think also it's important to finish by saying that, you know, the financial awareness throughout the organisation is growing as the awareness of the quality and safety agenda is growing. And it's our job to make sure that those two things remain incredibly connected to each other, which I think we are seeing happening. So thank you all for your contributions and for your attention, and I'm only finishing marginally late. So thanks very much. Our next meeting, I think we need to confirm whether that's in public or not on the 2nd of May. I'm not sure that non-exec directors are able to attend. It is. Okay, we just need to discuss quoracy then. Thank you.